There is a moment, somewhere deep in your first Fallout playthrough, where you stop moving. Maybe you are standing in the middle of an irradiated suburb, staring at a skeleton curled up beside a dinner table that was set for a meal that never got eaten. Maybe you are reading a terminal entry from someone who wrote their final journal update, not knowing the bombs were already on their way, and something clicks. You realize that this world did not just happen around you. Someone built every one of these stories, every note, every skeleton, every burned-out car on a highway going nowhere. Someone thought about what that person's last morning looked like and placed the evidence of it exactly where you would find it. That is what Fallout is. Beneath all the combat and the looting and the faction wars, it is one of the most densely layered works of world-building in gaming history, and even people who have sunk hundreds of hours into the series have barely scratched the surface of what is buried inside it. This video is going to take you through facts, secrets, lore details, developer decisions, cut content, and hidden mechanics that the overwhelming majority of players have never encountered. Some of these things were left intentionally. Some of them are accidents that became permanent features of the series. Some of them were cut before release and only rediscovered years later. And some of them will make you see games you thought you knew completely differently. Get comfortable. This one goes deep. Section 1. The true purpose of Vault-Tec and what most players never put together. Every Fallout player knows that the vaults were not what they claimed to be. That is one of the first things the series teaches you. You walk into your first vault, you read the first terminal, and you figure out pretty quickly that something went wrong in here, and that the wrongness was not accidental. But most players understand this on a surface level. They know the vaults were experiments. They know Vault-Tec was evil. What most players never fully grasp is the actual architecture of that evil, or how meticulously the games have hidden the full scope of Vault-Tec's real ambitions in places most people never think to look. Let's start with the number that most players walk past without stopping on. According to the lore scattered across multiple games, approximately 122 vaults were built across the continental United States before the Great War. 122. That is an enormous number, and the games lean into it as a kind of background fact that just makes the world feel big. But here is what that number actually means when you hold it up against another piece of information buried in the lore. Only 17 of those 122 vaults were ever designed to function as actual survival shelters. 17. Out of 122, the rest were experiments. All of them, in one form or another, were designed to generate data on human behavior under extreme stress. And the people who entered those vaults did so believing they were the lucky ones. This detail is technically in the games, scattered across terminals and notes and loading screen text that most players skim past. But putting the numbers together like that, in that specific way, makes it land differently. Vault-Tec did not build emergency shelters that happened to also run experiments. They built experiment chambers that happened to look like emergency shelters. The survival architecture was, from the very beginning, incidental to the actual purpose. Now, the question that most players never sit down to ask is, why? What was the point of gathering this behavioral data? What was Vault-Tec actually trying to accomplish? The answer is one of the most quietly disturbing threads in the entire series, and it is threaded through decades of games without ever being stated plainly. Vault-Tec at the highest executive level had prior knowledge of the Great War. They knew the bombs were coming. This is not a conspiracy theory. The Fallout TV series, which is considered canonical alongside the games, makes this fairly explicit, but fragments of it have been present in the game lore for much longer. The company built vaults not to protect humanity from a nuclear war they hoped would never happen, but to farm a controlled human population through a nuclear war they knew was inevitable, possibly one they helped engineer. The experiments were not random cruelty for its own sake. They were a systematic program to determine which human behavioral patterns, psychological profiles, social structures, and genetic configurations would produce the most viable and controllable post-war population. The people inside the vaults were livestock being prepared for a new world that Vault-Tec's leadership intended to control from the beginning. Most players who know the vaults were evil tend to think of it in terms of individual overseers making terrible choices, or corporate negligence at best, deliberate sadism at worst. The truth the lore hides is colder and more organized than that. This was a generational project, a plan that was supposed to play out over centuries. Here is a detail that helps make that real. Vault 101, the vault you emerge from at the start of Fallout 3, was never designed to open. Ever. Not after 10 years, not after 50 years, not after 100 years. The official line given to residents was that the all-clear signal would eventually come when the surface was safe. That signal was never planned. The vault was supplied with the kind of long-term maintenance equipment that would keep it running indefinitely, not the kind of equipment you would stock if you expected people to leave in a generation. The overseer of Vault 101, according to the lore in the game files, was a Vault-Tec operative who knew the truth and was tasked with maintaining the fiction. The radio transmissions residents received describing the horror of the surface world were not live broadcasts. They were pre-recorded, recorded before the bombs even fell. Describing a world more terrible than the real wasteland actually turned out to be, specifically calibrated to keep the residents too afraid to ever want to leave. The overseer sat in his sealed office, listened to news from the outside world via a hidden communication line, and fed his residents a scripted apocalypse designed to guarantee they never challenged the experiment. Think about what that means for Fallout 3's opening. You grow up in Vault 101. You play out your childhood. You are there for the birthday parties and the school lessons and the community Thanksgiving dinners. And all of it, every moment of your life in that vault, was a managed environment in a controlled study. The overseer knew. The generation before knew. They built a society around a lie, and they passed that lie down to their children, and their children believed it completely. Now here is the layer that most players miss entirely. When you leave Vault 101, and your father triggers the vault door to open for the first time in decades, the reaction from vault residents, the fear, the hostility, the people who want to drag you back, that is not just NPC programming. It is the behavioral product of Vault-Tec's experiment working exactly as designed. The residents were conditioned to be incapable of leaving. The outside world was not just unknown to them. It had been actively constructed as an object of existential horror. Your father escaping was not just a personal drama. It was a test subject breaking protocol that had been maintained for over 200 years. And then there is the design of the experiment itself. Vault-Tec's goal with Vault 101 was never stated to be about testing a specific variable like other vaults. It was not about testing what happens when you oversupply weapons, or when you create gender imbalances, or when you force a population to make impossible moral choices. The Vault 101 experiment was about the overseer. Specifically, it was about whether a single appointed authority figure, given complete informational control over a sealed population, could maintain indefinite compliance through managed fear. That is the experiment. And by 2277, when Fallout 3 begins, the answer the experiment had generated was yes, almost perfectly, for over 200 years. You walk out of that vault not just as an escaped prisoner. You walk out as the most dangerous piece of evidence Vault-Tec's project ever accidentally produced. If you want to see how thoroughly this architecture of controlled deception runs through the series, look at the radio. Throughout Fallout 3, you listen to Galaxy News Radio. Three Dog talks. Music plays. It feels like color and personality, like atmosphere. But buried in the game's design, if you trace what Three Dog says over the course of the game, the radio is also a source of information that shapes how the player understands the world. You are being given a narrative about who the heroes and villains are. The Enclave's broadcast does the same thing from the other direction. Two radio stations, two narratives, both trying to tell you who you are and where you belong. Fallout 3 is not subtle about this if you pay attention. Every faction in the wasteland is running some version of what Vault-Tec ran in Vault 101. They are all in the business of controlling what their people believe about the world outside their walls. The detail that very few players ever sit with long enough to fully absorb is this. The entire Fallout series, from the very first game through to Fallout 76 and the TV series, is fundamentally a story about information control, about who gets to decide what is true, and what happens to the people whose reality is built entirely on what they are told. The vaults are just the most concentrated expression of something that runs through every faction, every settlement, every radio broadcast in every game. The Enclave, the Brotherhood of Steel, the Institute, Caesar's Legion, Mr. House, all of them are, at their core, organizations built around controlling the narrative of what the wasteland is, what humanity needs, and what the future should look like. Vault-Tec did not create a post-apocalyptic world. They created a template for how power works in that world. And the games have been exploring variations on that template ever since. Drop a comment right now. Tell me where in the world you are watching this from and what time it is where you are. And if you have never subscribed, this is a good moment to do that. It helps more than most people realize. Section 2. The Vault Experiments: Cruelty as a Science, Hidden in the Details. The Vault experiments are one of those things in Fallout that every player knows about in a general way, but that most players have never actually mapped out in full. Because when you sit down and go through what Vault-Tec designed for each of these places, the cumulative picture is genuinely staggering. These were not improvised cruelties. They were methodical. They were calibrated. And the details buried in terminal entries, notes, and audio logs across multiple games tell stories that are far more sophisticated than the simple horror they appear to be on the surface. Vault 11 is where most players stop when they think about the best Vault story in the series, and for good reason. If you have not done the Vault 11 quest in Fallout New Vegas, stop this video and go do it immediately, then come back. What happens in Vault 11 is one of the most elegantly constructed moral horror stories in any game, and the fact that most players walk past the door to that vault entirely is a genuine tragedy. Here is the setup. The residents of Vault 11 are informed. When the vault seals, that one resident must be sacrificed each year to the vault's computer system. If they refuse, the computer will shut down life support, and everyone will die. What follows is 200 years of people finding increasingly elaborate and corrupt ways to decide who gets sacrificed, including elections that evolve into political campaigns specifically designed to lose, because the candidate who wins the election becomes the overseer, and the overseer at the end of each term gets sacrificed. So you get the extraordinary social absurdity of politicians campaigning against themselves, actively trying not to be elected, because being elected means dying. The residents form factions around the selection process. They develop ideologies about whose life is worth more. They have civil conflicts over the methodology of choosing who will die next. The terminal entries you read walking through Vault 11 document this 2-century collapse of a society in agonizing detail. And then the twist, which most players who find Vault 11 never reach because the location is genuinely difficult to complete, is that the sacrifice requirement was never real. The computer was testing whether the residents would choose self-preservation over moral principle, specifically whether a group of people under existential pressure would consent to killing each other indefinitely if they believed they had no choice. At the end of the Vault 11 questline, when the final group of survivors refuses to sacrifice another person and instead arms themselves to storm the control room, the computer congratulates them. It tells them that they have demonstrated moral courage under impossible conditions, and it opens the vault door. By that point, only 5 people remained alive in the entire vault. Over 200 years of choosing to sacrifice each other when the sacrifice was never required. And when the 5 survivors walk out into the sunlight of the Mojave, 4 of them immediately take their own lives in the cave entrance. Because they cannot live with what they participated in, even knowing the choice was engineered by a system designed to break them. One survivor remains, referred to only as Voice 1 in the terminal logs. She leaves a recording asking the world to remember what happened in Vault 11. That recording is the final thing you hear in the questline, and then the vault is quiet. The detail almost nobody catches. The behavioral data Vault 11 generated was about the relationship between authority, perceived inevitability, and moral atrocity. It was specifically modeled on the Milgram experiment, the real-world psychological study in which ordinary people were directed by an authority figure to administer increasingly severe electric shocks to another person, and a disturbing majority complied past the point of the subject apparently being in mortal danger, simply because someone in a position of authority told them to continue. Vault 11 scaled the Milgram experiment to a full society across multiple generations, and the answer it got was the same as Milgram's. Most people will participate in something they know to be monstrous, as long as they believe they have no choice, and as long as the structure around them treats that participation as normal. Vault-Tec designed the vault to test what happens when a society is finally given a genuine choice and refuses to comply. The answer, apparently, was guilt deep enough to destroy the people who made the right decision. Now let's talk about Vault 92, which is in Fallout 3 and which almost no player fully investigates because it does not have a major associated quest. The Vault was presented to applicants as a specialized facility for elite musicians, a place where the world's greatest musical talent would be preserved through the nuclear apocalypse and emerge to lead cultural rebuilding. Vault-Tec recruited musicians specifically, filling the vault with exceptionally talented people who believed they had been selected for their gifts. The actual experiment was subliminal audio conditioning. White noise was broadcast throughout the vault's systems, and embedded in that white noise were stress triggers and aggression stimulants, essentially turning the vault's background sound into a slow behavioral modification program. Over time, the subjects experienced increasing episodes of extreme violence triggered by the white noise broadcasts, episodes they had no memory of after the fact, which were explained away by Vault staff as psychological breakdowns. Terminal entries document musicians who had been peaceful and gentle their entire lives suddenly committing acts of brutal violence against neighbors and friends, with no recollection of why. The Vault's research team documented these episodes clinically, noting the effectiveness of different frequency combinations in producing different behavioral outputs. The Vault destroyed itself, as most vaults did, because the experiment was eventually conducted at a scale and intensity that exceeded the Vault staff's ability to contain. Terminal entries from Vault 92 describe the moment when the white noise was pushed to maximum intensity and the entire Vault population attempted to kill each other simultaneously. What the researchers were testing, the detail that is easy to miss because it sounds so bloodlessly academic in the terminal entries, was whether behavioral modification through ambient sound could be used to produce controllable violence on demand. Not random aggression. Controllable violence, with specific triggers and predictable response patterns. The intended application, implied but never stated in the game files, was a military one. They were testing whether you could create soldiers who would become violent on command and return to compliance when the trigger was removed, without ever being aware of the conditioning. The musicians were chosen not because music was important to preserve, but because musicians were expected to be unusually sensitive to audio stimuli. They were better test subjects. Vault 106 in Fallout 3 is another one most players walk through without understanding what actually happened. The experiment there involved releasing a psychoactive drug compound through the ventilation system, something that produced paranoia, vivid hallucinations, and extreme aggression. The residents were never told. What you find in Vault 106 are the generational descendants of that original drugged population, people who have grown up their entire lives in an altered neurochemical state, who have built a culture and a social structure around perceptions and behaviors that were chemically engineered into their ancestors. The few surviving residents you encounter are hostile and disoriented, and some players assume this is standard Fallout mob behavior. But the terminal entries, which are detailed and clinical, explain that Vault-Tec was studying what kind of society forms when baseline human cognition is pharmacologically altered across generations. Whether culture, language, social hierarchy, and ethics could function under continuous chemical impairment. Whether impaired cognition would produce a more or less compliant population. Vault 77, which technically only appears in a Penny Arcade webcomic but is referenced in Fallout 3 and is considered canonical lore, was designed with a different kind of cruelty. One man and a crate full of puppets. The vault door was designed to seal automatically when the single resident entered and to reopen months later. The research question was about isolation and the human tendency toward anthropomorphism, specifically whether a person in complete isolation would project consciousness onto inanimate objects and use that projection to maintain psychological stability. The answer the vault generated was that the resident, referred to in the lore as the Puppet Man, did exactly that. He gave each puppet a name and a personality. He built social relationships with objects. And then, as the months extended into years and the social relationships he had built became more elaborate, the line between comfort mechanism and genuine belief began to blur in ways the terminal entries document with quiet alarm. He began to believe the puppets had interior lives. He conducted negotiations with them. He responded to the puppets as though they were agents in the world capable of their own decisions. The reference to this in Fallout 3 is a holotape in Paradise Falls near a Vault 77 jumpsuit, warning slavers to burn the jumpsuit because its previous owner, the Puppet Man, had become a legendary figure the slavers feared. According to the note, he had emerged from his vault and had become essentially unkillable in the wasteland, a solitary figure traveling with his puppets, demonstrating capabilities that the slavers found inexplicable. Vault 22 in New Vegas takes the experimental framework into biology. The vault was populated with people who were told their mission was to develop agricultural science that would feed the surface world after emergence. They were the good vault, the optimistic one. The residents were scientists and farmers who genuinely believed in their work. The experiment was the introduction of a parasitic spore that Vault-Tec researchers believed could be controlled and harvested as a nutrient source. The spore could not be controlled. It worked its way through the vault ecosystem, infecting plants first, then insects, then the people who ate them. The residents mutated slowly, their bodies colonized by the fungal organism until their consciousness was consumed by the hive mind of the spore network. What you find in Vault 22 are the botanical consequences of that experiment. Entire floors overgrown with plant life, unlike anything on the surface, strange spore creatures that were once human, and in the deepest levels, evidence of what happens when a designed experiment becomes uncontainable. The research notes left by the vault scientists track the moment they realized what was happening to them and the desperate failed attempts to develop a counter-agent before the spore took them. The detail almost nobody catches. The spore organism from Vault 22 did not stay contained in the vault. It escaped. The Vault 22 research files are one of the major quest drivers in the Honest Hearts DLC for New Vegas, because a missionary named Randall Clark encountered evidence of the Vault 22 spore survivors in the Utah wilderness and tracked what happened to them over decades of journal entries hidden throughout Zion Canyon. His journal is one of the most quietly devastating pieces of writing in the entire Fallout series, and it can be entirely missed by players who do not explore Honest Hearts thoroughly. Vault 95 in Fallout 4 is the one that most completely dissolves the idea that any vault had good intentions. It was presented to applicants as a rehabilitation center, specifically designed to help people struggling with addiction recover in the structured safety of a vault community. The residents were told their addiction history made them uniquely qualified, that they were the kind of people civilization needed, people who understood struggle and had chosen to fight for something better. The vault was their reward, a genuine fresh start, a community that understood them. 5 years into the vault's operation, Vault-Tec agents hidden among the resident population revealed the location of a massive cache of chems they had concealed in the vault before the experiment began. The research question was simple. Given a group of people who had achieved stability and recovery within a structured community, and then reintroduced access to the substance they had previously been addicted to, what percentage would relapse? How quickly? What would the social dynamics look like? Would community bonds prove stronger than addiction, or would addiction prove stronger than community bonds? The terminal entries document the collapse with the kind of cold, observational precision that Vault-Tec maintained throughout all its experiments. The vault tore itself apart within months. The researchers noted their findings with satisfaction. Mission accomplished. Section 3. The 23rd of October, 2077, the last morning before everything. One of the things Fallout does better than almost any other game series is the before. Not the apocalypse itself, but the morning before the apocalypse. The texture of ordinary life on the last day anyone expected to still be alive. And buried in the way the games handle that last day are details that most players never fully absorb because they are presented as background color rather than foreground plot. Let's establish the facts the games give us. The Great War began on the morning of Saturday, the 23rd of October 2077. The first nuclear missiles were detected by American defense systems at 9:13 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. A retaliatory strike was ordered at 9:26 a.m. By 11:26 a.m., the exchange was over. 2 hours. In 2 hours, 7.54 billion people died, or were set on the path toward dying from radiation, starvation, or the collapse of infrastructure. A civilization that had been building for thousands of years was functionally erased in the time it takes to watch a movie. The games drop you into this morning in different ways across the series, and the details they choose to emphasize are telling. Fallout 4 puts you there most directly, giving you an actual playable sequence set in the suburbs of Boston on the morning the bombs fall. And the first thing the game does with that sequence is use it to establish normalcy. The news is on. The Pip-Boy salesman is at the door. Your spouse is talking about a conference call. Your son is playing. The TV is discussing the Chinese conflict in the clipped, jargon-heavy language of people who have grown up with the conflict as permanent background noise, the same way real generations have grown up with particular wars being permanent background noise. The war itself is old by this point. The Sino-American War, the resource conflict over petroleum and coal reserves, had been running for decades. It had become, for most civilians, a thing that happened elsewhere. A thing that made fuel expensive and sometimes meant rationing, but a thing that the military was handling, that the government had under control. The Fallout lore is meticulous about this detail. The people who died in the Great War were not living in a society that was obviously about to end. They were living in a society that had learned to normalize constant low-level crisis so effectively that the escalation toward nuclear exchange registered for most people as more of the same. The Enclave's radio broadcast in Fallout 3 refers to the United States as if the nation still exists, as if the Enclave is its government in exile. And for the Enclave, functionally, it does still exist. They are the remnants of a government apparatus that survived the war in deep bunkers and mobile installations and oil platforms, and they maintained the institutional culture and the legal fictions of the old United States while everything else burned. This is another detail most players treat as villain flavor. But it reveals something about the war's impact that is easy to miss. The government that sent millions of soldiers to die in Alaska and China and Canada was not caught off guard by the bombs. The Enclave was already positioned for survival. High-level leadership knew. Now, here is a fact that the games and lore have circled around without ever fully landing on, and that was only decisively addressed by original Fallout co-creator Tim Kaine in interviews years after the first game's release. Who launched first? The answer, Tim Kaine says he intended, China fired first. But the reason China fired first is the part that is buried in the lore in ways most players never find. According to Kaine's stated intent, the United States had been developing FEV, the Forced Evolutionary Virus, as a bioweapon. The FEV is the same mutagen that created super mutants throughout the series. In the pre-war context, it was a covert military research program. International bioweapons treaties made this research illegal. China discovered it. The United States, when confronted, did not stop the research. They moved it. China interpreted this as a declaration that international agreements meant nothing, that the United States would continue illegal weapons development regardless of treaties, and that the only rational response was a preemptive strike before that weapon could be weaponized and used. The bombs did not fall because two nations went mad simultaneously. According to the logic buried in the lore, they fell because one nation's leadership made a calculated decision to prioritize a weapons program over a treaty, assumed they could conceal it, and misjudged how completely they would be found out. The irony that runs through the entire Fallout universe is that the FEV program, the thing that may have started the war, never actually worked as a weapon. It produced super mutants, not a controllable biological agent. The United States broke its treaty commitments, potentially triggered a nuclear exchange that killed billions of people, and got nothing useful out of it. The research was a failure dressed up in military urgency. This is something the Fallout games are very good at quietly suggesting without ever stating. The things that caused the most catastrophic outcomes in this world were not grand evil schemes. They were bureaucratic decisions made by people who convinced themselves that the risk was worth it, that they could manage the consequences, and that the ends justified increasingly terrible means until the accumulation of those decisions reached a point of no return. Mr. House knew the bombs were coming. He built a missile defense network specifically to protect Las Vegas, and he had it operational before October 23rd. He was not a government insider. He was a private citizen who looked at the trajectory of global events and concluded that nuclear war was inevitable, and who had the resources and the intelligence to actually do something about it. His systems took down 68 of the 77 warheads headed for Las Vegas. 9 got through. 9 was enough to kill the power grid, crater several outlying areas, and irradiate the surrounding region for decades. But Las Vegas survived. The Strip survived. And that survival, and the 2 centuries of preparation that followed it, and the geopolitical situation the city finds itself in at the start of Fallout New Vegas, all trace back to one man looking at the same data everyone else had access to, and actually believing the conclusion it pointed toward. The detail most New Vegas players absorb, but few really sit with. There were other people in the world who had access to the same information, Mr. House had, the Enclave had it, Vault-Tec had it, the Brotherhood of Steel leadership had it, various government officials and military commanders had it. The difference between Mr. House and all of them is not that he knew something they did not. It is that he was willing to bet everything on the knowledge he had to actually act on the conclusion rather than continuing to pretend the situation was manageable. In New Vegas, you spend the entire game deciding what the future of the Mojave should look like. You can side with the NCR, a democratic republic trying to rebuild civilization. You can side with Caesar's Legion, a totalitarian empire built on military conquest. You can side with Mr. House, a pre-war genius who wants to guide humanity through the next 200 years of development. Or you can go independent, trying to build something new. What the game never tells you directly, but embeds in every piece of lore about the pre-war period, is that every single one of those options is a version of something that already existed before the bombs fell. The NCR is the United States. The Legion is the Roman Empire, repackaged for a post-nuclear context. Mr. House is a corporate executive who has replaced a failing democratic system with a more competent autocracy. Even the yes-man independent route, the scrappy underdog choosing their own destiny against massive institutional power, is a recognizable pre-war archetype. The Fallout universe did not create new political forms after the apocalypse. It recreated the old ones from the rubble, and the games, if you are paying attention, seem to be asking whether that was inevitable, whether human beings, given the chance to start over, will always rebuild the same structures that destroyed them the first time. The answer different playthroughs of New Vegas give you is probably yes. Every ending slide, regardless of which faction you supported, describes a future that slides back toward the patterns of the pre-war world. The NCR expands and becomes bureaucratically corrupt. The Legion's discipline collapses after Caesar dies. Mr. House's long-term plan requires levels of control that may not survive contact with the unpredictability of actual human populations. The independent Vegas, the one where you theoretically have the most agency, still ends with the courier eventually becoming just another power center that others have to work around. One of the facts that most players overlook because it is tucked into the environmental storytelling rather than the dialogue or terminal entries. On the morning of the 23rd of October, 2077, the Platinum chip was scheduled to be delivered to the Lucky 38 Casino in Las Vegas. Mr. House had arranged a delivery. In the afternoon of that same day, the world ended. The chip, containing the software upgrade that would allow Mr. House to unlock his full network of Securitrons and establish real control over the region, did not arrive. That gap, between the scheduled delivery and the bombs, is the entire reason New Vegas' story is possible. If the chip had been delivered 6 hours earlier, Mr. House would have been operating from a position of complete power from the moment he emerged from the Lucky 38. The courier's journey, the entire war for the Mojave, happens because a delivery was running behind schedule on the last day of the world. The mundanity of that detail, the fact that the fate of a post-apocalyptic civilization hinges on a delivery being late, is very Fallout. The games are full of this. The greatest calamities and the most significant turning points trace back to small, ordinary failures. A broken water chip, a delivery that got delayed, a research program that got moved rather than canceled. The apocalypse was not a single dramatic event. It was 1,000 ordinary failures accumulating until there was nothing left to stop the extraordinary one. Section 4. New Vegas cut content and the 1-8 month development secret. Fallout New Vegas is broadly considered one of the greatest role-playing games ever made. The writing is dense, the faction dynamics are genuinely complex, the companion characters have inner lives that feel real, and the world of the Mojave tells 100 small stories in between the major plot beats. It is an extraordinary achievement. It is also, by the assessment of the developers themselves, profoundly unfinished. Obsidian Entertainment was given 18 months to develop Fallout New Vegas. 18 months. For context, a typical large-scale RPG development cycle runs 4 to 6 years. The game that launched in October 2010 was not the game Obsidian intended to make. It was the game they could finish in time, assembled from the parts of a larger game that had to be cut, compressed, or redone in the final weeks before release. The extent of what was cut only became fully apparent in late 2024 and early 2025, when development kits from Obsidian Entertainment were discovered in a small game store in Utah, containing a beta build of New Vegas from the 21st of July 2010, less than 3 months before the game's release. This build was 2 gigabytes larger than the final release. 2 gigabytes sounds like a technical detail, but in game terms, it represents an enormous amount of content that was removed in the final stretch of development. Ulysses is the most famous piece of cut content in New Vegas history, and even many dedicated fans do not know the full story of how he was intended to appear. Most players know Ulysses from Lonesome Road, the final DLC, where he serves as the antagonist and delivers long monologues about the nature of nations, symbols, and the courier's identity. He is a compelling character, and Lonesome Road is built around him. But in the original design for New Vegas's base game, Ulysses was meant to be a companion, a full companion, one of the characters you could recruit to travel with you through the Mojave, with his own affinity system, his own personal quest, his own perspective on every major faction's ideology. He was cut approximately 2 months before the game was finalized. The reason given by developers was that his content was taking up too much space and the team had run out of time to finish him properly. Files referencing him are scattered throughout the game's code, labeled in ways that suggest his presence was deeply integrated into the structure of the main game. His presence at Wolfhorn Ranch is referenced in game files. His interactions with the major factions were being written. He was cut so close to the end that modders working with the beta build have been trying to reconstruct exactly what his base game role would have been. His eventual appearance in Lonesome Road was a rescue of the character rather than an intended design decision. He was preserved in DLC because the team had not given up on him, even after cutting him from the main game. The strip in New Vegas was also significantly different from what the game shipped with. Pre-release footage from E3 2010, released just months before the game came out, shows Las Vegas's strip as a single continuous street, a much larger space than the 3 gated sections that appear in the final game. The NPC density was dramatically higher in the pre-release build. There were more people walking around, more activity, more of the city feeling like a city rather than a collection of buildings connected by corridors. The street was cut down because the PlayStation 3 could not handle the rendering load. The performance issues were severe enough that Obsidian had to fundamentally reduce the scope of the game's most iconic location to make it playable on the hardware. Freeside, the impoverished district outside the strip that houses much of New Vegas's side content, was also originally a single zone rather than 2 separate areas. The split was again a performance decision made under deadline pressure. The version of Freeside in the final game, which many players find thin and underpopulated, was meant to be a much richer environment. More NPCs, more environmental detail. More of the contrast between the wealth of the strip and the desperation right outside its doors that the game is clearly trying to establish. Benny, the main antagonist of New Vegas's opening act, had significantly more content built around him than the final game shows. After you recover the platinum chip and confront Benny at the Tops Casino, there was originally a chase sequence. Benny was supposed to flee through a hidden tunnel connecting the Tops to Vault 21, the sealed vault beneath the city that he apparently used as a private passage for moving in and out of the strip without Mr. House's knowledge. This chase would have been a full scripted sequence, with Benny running through corridors rigged with explosives. The tunnel itself, a piece of world building about how the strip's geography worked below street level. The tunnel exists in the game files. The nav mesh is there. The beginning of the scripted sequence is still in the code. But the chase itself was cut, and the tunnel was sealed off. Benny in the final game just gets captured, which is dramatically much flatter than the original design. The post-game content is the cut that most fans who have followed the development history find most painful. Originally, after the second Battle of Hoover Dam concluded the main story, the game was not supposed to end. There were planned missions set in the immediate aftermath of the battle, quests specific to whichever ending you had chosen, showing the first days of the new order that your choices had established. The NCR questline had additional content. So did the Legion path. The Mr. House path had specific post-game missions. Even the Independent Vegas route was planned to have a follow-up sequence. All of this was cut entirely. The current ending slides, which are extensive and well-written, are essentially a compensation for the fact that the post-game content had to go. The slides tell you what happened. the game was supposed to show you. The beta build also contains evidence of a version of Mr. House that looked different. The model used in the beta more closely resembles Steve Buscemi than the comparatively clean-featured version in the final game. This is a small detail, but a striking one, given that the more unconventional-looking pre-release Mr. House arguably fit better with the character's personality. Someone who has been alive for over 200 years through a combination of technological life extension and sheer stubborn will, and who is, beneath the slick presentation, profoundly strange. There is also a cut Securitron in the Lucky 38 named Marilyn. She was a companion to Mr. House's court of Securitron personalities, clearly modeled on Marilyn Monroe in the same way that the Securitron Victor is modeled on a generic cowboy archetype. Voice lines for Marilyn were recorded and are present in the beta build. She was removed before release, and the restoration mod community has been working to put her back in the game since the beta was made available. The Big Gun's skill was removed from New Vegas entirely, a significant departure from Fallout 3 where it was a standard combat skill. The removal happened late enough in development that references to it are still embedded in the game's code. Every time a skill check is performed on a dialogue option relating to combat skills, Big Guns is silently checked alongside the skills that actually exist in the game. The game is performing a check it can never pass or fail because the skill no longer exists. The ghost of Big Guns haunts every combat dialogue in New Vegas, invisible and inert. Section 5. Wild Wasteland, a whole hidden game within the game. New Vegas contains, inside its already enormous world, a second game that is almost entirely invisible unless you know to look for it. The Wild Wasteland trait is available at Character Creation, one of 2 optional trait selections that modify your gameplay experience. Most players treat it as a curiosity, something that sounds fun and unusual. The game's description makes it sound like a perk that adds random weirdness to your travels. That description is technically accurate and completely undersells what Wild Wasteland actually is. Wild Wasteland is a hidden layer of the game built specifically for players who are familiar with the original Fallout and Fallout 2. It takes 15 major encounters throughout New Vegas's world, encounters that would otherwise be mundane, mercenary camps, ordinary hostile locations, and unremarkable buildings, and replaces them with scenes that are deliberately absurd, deeply referential, or both. The trait was added to New Vegas after a debate within Obsidian's development team about tone. Some developers wanted to include more outrageous, cartoonish content as a callback to the humor of the original games. Others felt this tone would undermine the more grounded, serious-feeling Mojave Wasteland they were building. Joshua Sawyer, the game's lead director, solved the problem by making both versions of the game exist simultaneously, segmented behind a character trait. If you want the straight-faced version of New Vegas, you play without Wild Wasteland. If you want the weird version, you take the trait. The alien encounter is the most mechanically significant Wild Wasteland moment. North of the Horowitz farmstead, if you have the trait, you find a crashed spacecraft and 3 aliens huddled around a campfire. This is the same spacecraft model used in Fallout 3's Mothership Zeta DLC, a subtle bit of world-building continuity. The alien captain carries the Alien Blaster, a powerful energy weapon that becomes one of the rarest and most interesting guns in the game. Kill the aliens, take the blaster. There are only around 120 power cells for it in the entire game, making every shot count. If you do not have Wild Wasteland, this location is a mercenary camp, and one of the mercenaries carries the YCS-186, a unique Gauss rifle that is arguably a better weapon in practical terms. The game is genuinely giving you a choice between a rare, thematic weapon and a rare, practical weapon, based on whether you wanted the world to be weird. The Indiana Jones encounter is hidden southeast of Good Springs, along a road out of town. A refrigerator sits in the middle of the desert. Inside are the skeletal remains of a man wearing a distinctive hat, labeled the Suave Gambler hat. The reference is to the infamous refrigerator scene in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, in which the character survives a nuclear blast by hiding in a lead-lined refrigerator. New Vegas's version is the realistic take, the bones of someone who apparently tried the same thing and did not survive. It is funny and bleak simultaneously, which is exactly the register Wild Wasteland aims for. The Star Wars encounter requires extra attention to find because it does not announce itself with the wild wasteland musical sting. In the ruins of Nipton, on the edge of the town near some destroyed houses, you can find two named skeletons labeled Owen and Beru. Luke Skywalker's adoptive aunt and uncle in A New Hope are named Owen and Beru Lars, and they are killed by Imperial stormtroopers searching for droids, their homestead burned. Nipton in New Vegas was sacked by Caesar's Legion. The parallel is quiet and precise. Two named skeletons in a burned-out location, connected to an absent protagonist who will never find them in time. The Monty Python encounters are plural, and specifically target Holy Grail. In the church basement in the heavily irradiated Camp Searchlight, there are two boxes on a table. One contains 3 holy frag grenades. The label on the second box reads, "Pull pin and count to 5-3. This is a reference to the Holy Hand Grenade of Antioch from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, complete with the gag that the instructions are for counting to 5, but the relevant number is 3 with the 5 crossed out. The grenades work like standard frag grenades, except they have a slightly unusual explosion effect. They are there to be found and used, and the joke is self-contained enough that you can find it, understand it, and enjoy it without the game ever pointing at it. On a wall in Cottonwood Cove, another Legion location, there is writing in Latin that reads, "Romans go home," with a correction visible next to it. This is the Life of Brian gag, specifically the scene where the Romans correct a graffitist's Latin grammar. In the Monty Python scene, it is Romans correcting a Jewish revolutionary. In New Vegas, it is, implicitly, someone in Caesar's Legion correcting a graffitist who did not properly conjugate their Latin. The joke works on 2 levels, as a Monty Python reference for anyone who recognizes it, and as a piece of consistent world-building that suggests the Legion's strict hierarchy would absolutely include people who care about grammar. In the Old World Blues DLC, inside the Higgs Village test neighborhood, there is a doghouse with the name Stripe written on it. A tiny Deathclaw lives inside. When you approach, Stripe comes out and attacks you. This is a reference to the 1984 Gremlins film, in which a Mogwai named Stripe transforms into the leader of the monstrous Gremlins. In the Fallout universe, a Deathclaw named Stripe replacing a family's cybernetic dog in a post-apocalyptic suburban test environment has exactly the right level of deranged charm. The little Jimmy encounter happens only if Rex, the cyborg dog companion, is with you. At some point during travel with Rex, he stops and produces a dog noise the game translates as concern about a nearby well. The well's location is marked on your map. When you find it and drop inside, you find a child's skeleton, a rawhide cowboy hat, some supplies, and a BB gun. The reference is layered. It connects to the Lassie television show, in which Lassie would alert adults when a child named Timmy was in danger, and to a similar quest in Fallout 2, where the Chosen One searches for a boy named Johnny who may have fallen into a town well. New Vegas is both referencing classic television and referencing its own series history simultaneously. At the NCR emergency radio during the final Battle of Hoover Dam, if you have Wild Wasteland active, you can hear a soldier broadcasting, "They're coming out of the walls, man. They're coming out of the damn walls." This is a verbatim quote from Private Hudson in James Cameron's 1986 Aliens, a line delivered in a moment of absolute breakdown. The fact that it is placed in a battle broadcast where soldiers are genuinely being overwhelmed by enemies, meaning it works both as an absurd pop culture reference and as accurate battle stress communication, is very deliberately calibrated. The detail about Wild Wasteland that most players who take the trait completely miss. Choosing Wild Wasteland is permanent, but choosing not to take it is not. You can add Wild Wasteland to your character later through the auto-dock in the sink, the DLC base of operations in Old World Blues. Critically, doing so retroactively enables all Wild Wasteland encounters you have not yet visited. Every location transforms. The one exception is the Alien Blaster encounter, which cannot be retroactively obtained if you have already visited the location, because the mercenary camp will have already spawned and cannot be replaced. But all 21 other Wild Wasteland encounters become accessible. This means a player who goes through their entire main game without Wild Wasteland, then adds it before finishing the DLC, can still access almost all of the hidden layer on a single playthrough. Joshua Sawyer confirmed in a retrospective stream that Wild Wasteland was genuinely controversial internally, and that the decision to make it optional was protective as much as creative. He wanted to preserve the option for players who wanted a game that felt grounded, but he also recognized that the references to classic Fallout special encounters, the aliens, the rodents of unusual size, the absurdist humor, were part of the series' DNA and deserved a home in New Vegas. The trade is not just a joke delivery mechanism, it is a philosophical statement about what Fallout is allowed to be, made optional so that it does not compromise what it does not need to be. Section 6. Fallout 3's Unmarked Stories. The Wasteland's Forgotten Narratives. Fallout 3 contains more story than most players will ever find. Not just unmarked quests, though there are dozens of those scattered across the capital wasteland. The deeper story is in the world itself, in the scattered notes and terminal entries and holotapes and skeletons that collectively document what happened to Washington, D.C. in the hours, days, months, and years after the bombs fell. Most of this material is technically accessible. Almost none of it is ever read by the average player. The McClellan family townhome in Georgetown, at a house labeled 2096 Bradley Lane, is one of the most elaborately crafted environmental stories in the game, and it is unmarked off the main quest paths and requires entering a building that looks like every other ruined building in that part of the city. Inside, a Mr. Handy robot continues to service the house as if the family were still alive. He patrols. He cooks. He tells the children it is time for bed, speaking to children who are not there, who have not been there for 200 years. If you read the terminal entries in the house, you find the family's pre-war life documented in ordinary detail. Appointments, grocery lists, a note about a birthday party. The Mr. Handy's programming was never updated after the bombs fell. He has been maintaining a family that no longer exists for over 200 years. This is a reference to a Ray Bradbury short story called There Will Come Soft Rains, in which an automated house continues its programmed routines after a nuclear war has eliminated the family that lived in it. The house eventually burns down, and the last voice to be extinguished is the house's automated voice, still reading a poem to no one. Bethesda recreated this scene in meticulous detail, including the Mr. Handy reciting a poem to the empty house if you stay long enough. The poem is Sarah Teasdale's There Will Come Soft Rains, the same poem the house recites in the Bradbury story. Most players who find this location never know what they are standing inside. The radio towers scattered across the capital wasteland are one of the most elaborate hidden features in Fallout 3, and almost no one follows all of them to their conclusion. Each radio tower broadcasts a Morse code signal. Decoding those signals reveals the locations of supply caches hidden nearby, a mechanic that rewards players who either know Morse code or are willing to look up the translations. Most players who stumble across the towers treat them as ambient flavor, background audio that suggests a world that had communication infrastructure before the war. Two of the towers are different. One broadcasts the voice of a father searching desperately for medicine for his sick son. The broadcast has been running automatically since before the player character was born. Following the signal to its source reveals that no one ever responded. No one brought the medicine. The father and his son are long dead, the father's voice still reaching out into a wasteland that never answered him. Another tower's broadcast resolves into something worse. Following the signal leads to a ham radio surrounded by feral ghouls, their moaning channeled through the broadcasting equipment into a signal that sounds at distance, like human distress. The search for a survivor leads to evidence that there is no survivor. There is only the accumulated noise of things that were once people. The Andale neighborhood is one of the capital wasteland's most structurally disturbing hidden locations, and it is presented in a way that makes it easy to walk through without understanding what you are looking at. Andale appears to be a pleasant small community. The residents are friendly, chatty, and protective of what they describe as a good, traditional way of life. The mystery unravels if you do three things. Look inside the shed behind one of the houses, read the contents of a locked storage box in another, and speak to the neighborhood children. Andale is a community of cannibals. Not desperate post-war cannibals driven by starvation, but a community that has maintained cannibalism as a chosen way of life across generations, that has developed social rituals and family structures around the practice, and that presents a friendly, welcoming exterior to strangers who are being assessed as food. The shed contains human remains. The storage box contains records of visitors who came through and what happened to them. The children, notably, are unaware of what their families do because the community's adults have carefully protected them from the knowledge to ensure the next generation can be introduced to the practice gradually and without resistance. The same design Vault 101's overseer used to maintain compliance, control the information children have access to, and they will build their identity around whatever reality you give them. Rockopolis is perhaps the most completely hidden location in Fallout 3. It is a pre-war underground city, or at least the beginning of one, an ambitious construction that never got finished because the bombs fell before it was complete. The entrance is a rock face in the wilderness, west of Smith Casey's garage, that glows softly at night but blends almost perfectly into the landscape during the day. Nothing on the surface points to it. No quest sends you there. The map does not mark it. At night, the bioluminescent glow of whatever is living inside the cave system makes the entrance faintly visible to someone who already knows to look. Inside, you find the remains of a community that tried to build something new underground after the war. They had the right idea. They had a charismatic leader named Ozymandias who tried to keep people organized and hopeful, and then a slaver named Arkansas found them. The terminal entries and notes in Rockopolis document the slaver's arrival and what followed with the kind of quietly devastating specificity that Fallout 3's environmental storytelling does better than almost any other game. By the time you find this place, it has been empty for decades. The slavers took the people they wanted and killed those they did not. What remains is the architecture of a hope that did not survive contact with the wasteland. The Jig's loot quest is an unmarked chain that rewards patience and lateral thinking with one of the best weapons in the game. It begins with a terminal entry in the Museum of Technology, a log numbered 000 that is easy to overlook among dozens of other terminal entries. Reading it triggers nothing. No quest marker appears, but the entry contains the beginning of a code, and subsequent entries scattered across the museum form a puzzle. Following the complete chain of clues eventually leads to a location far south of the museum where Jig's loot is hidden, including the Xuanlong assault rifle, an exceptional weapon that most players never find because they never follow the museum's terminal entries past the first one. The Agatha's Station quest is technically a marked quest, but it is associated with a location so obscure and so far from any other quest destination that the percentage of players who find it through natural exploration rather than guides is vanishingly small. Agatha's shack sits on top of a cliff in an isolated part of the map, accessible via a path that is almost invisible from below. Agatha is an elderly woman who plays a rare Stradivarius violin for no audience, because there is no audience left in her part of the wasteland. If you bring her a replacement violin bow from one of the game's vaults, she continues playing and sets up a radio station that broadcasts nothing but classical music across the capital wasteland. The quest is worth completing not because of the reward, which is modest, but because of what Agatha's radio station adds to the world. It is the most peaceful thing in Fallout 3. The quest chain involving Herbert Dashwood and his companion Argyle is one of Fallout 3's most elaborately concealed stories. Galaxy News Radio plays serialized adventure stories about Herbert Dashwood, an implausible pre-war swashbuckler, and his faithful ghoul manservant Argyle. The stories are entertaining and played for gentle comedy, the kind of thing you listen to on long walks across the wasteland and half absorb as background entertainment. Most players never realize that Herbert Dashwood is a real person. He lives in Tenpenny Tower, an elderly man who did genuinely have the adventures Three Dog narrates on GNR. If you find him and talk to him, he asks you to find out what happened to Argyle, whom he lost track of years ago. Following that quest leads to a cave where you find Argyle's remains and a holotape recording his final moments. He died defending a position he chose to hold because Herbert needed time to escape. The companion from the comedic radio adventures died alone in a dark cave, doing exactly what the story said he always did, being more loyal than the situation required. Section 7. Fallout 4's hidden mechanics and the companion system. Nobody fully understands. Fallout 4 is, among dedicated fans of the series, a somewhat contested game. Its RPG systems are simpler than New Vegas's. Its dialogue system, while flexible in practice, was criticized at launch for feeling restrictive. Its story is less morally complex than what Obsidian did with the Mojave, but in certain categories, Fallout 4 is doing things that no other game in the series has matched, and most players never find out about them because the game simply does not tell you. The affinity system is the most important hidden mechanic in Fallout 4, and it is hidden completely. There is no visible progress bar. There is no notification system that tells you your relationship with a companion is changing. The affinity value for each companion is tracked internally on a scale from 0 to 1,100 points, and it changes constantly based on actions you take while that companion is following you. You can be quietly destroying or building a companion relationship for dozens of hours without knowing it. The system works through a database of actions each companion approves of and disapproves of, matched against a personality profile that is unique to each character. Piper Wright, the journalist companion, approves every time you choose to help someone in a settlement, every time you select a dialogue option that suggests you care about the truth, and every time you pick a locked container, which the game codes as information-gathering behavior consistent with a reporter's instincts. She disapproves when you perform selfish actions, when you harm innocent people, when you take drugs in front of her. The game is not tracking whether you are good or evil in a general sense. It is tracking whether your choices are consistent with what this specific character would respect. Kate, the cage fighter companion from Combat Zone, has an almost inverse profile. She approves of drug use, of theft, of selfish dialogue options, of combat. She grew up in an environment where strength and self-interest were survival tools, and her approval system reflects what those values look like from the inside. She does not disapprove of violence or cruelty in the way that Piper does. She disapproves of passivity, of giving things away, of choices that suggest weakness. Making Kate trust you is not about being a good person. It is about demonstrating that you are someone capable of surviving by any means necessary, which is the only kind of person she knows how to respect. The cooldown system on affinity changes is something most players notice indirectly without understanding. If you do something a companion approves of and then immediately do it again, you will not get a second affinity boost. There is a cooldown period, measured in in-game time, before the same action can generate another affinity change. This was implemented to prevent players from grinding a single action repeatedly to max out a companion relationship, but it creates an interesting emergent behavior. Building genuine relationships with companions works better if you play naturally, because natural play generates varied actions, which generate more frequent affinity boosts across different categories. The companion perks are the reward for reaching maximum affinity, and they are entirely permanent. Once earned, a perk stays with you even if you break up with the companion, even if you kill them, even if you never see them again. You cannot lose these perks. They are also among the strongest passives in the game, and most players either do not know they exist or do not pursue them systematically. Deacon's perk, awarded by maxing out the railroad agent who pretends to be a different person every time you meet him, gives you a 20% bonus to sneak attack damage with ranged and melee weapons, plus a 40% duration boost to Stealth Boy invisibility. It is a completely transformative perk for a stealth build. Nick Valentine's perk, once you complete his personal quest, gives you one extra attempt when hacking locked terminals, which sounds minor until you realize it makes the hacking minigame essentially impossible to fail permanently. The cover system in Fallout 4 is a hidden mechanic the game demonstrates once, briefly, in a loading screen tip and then never references again. When you are standing next to a wall or corner, your weapon dips slightly. This is the visual signal that you are in cover. If you aim while in cover, your character will lean out from the wall to shoot and duck back when you stop aiming. This is a meaningful tactical option that changes how combat can be approached, particularly against enemies with powerful long-range weapons. The vast majority of players who do not read loading screen tips never discover it. Holding the reload button while moving holsters your weapon and provides a small speed boost. It also calms NPCs you may have accidentally aggravated by drawing a weapon in a populated area. If you pull out your gun near Diamond City residents and someone gets nervous, putting the weapon away quickly often de-escalates the situation before it becomes a fight. This is in the game. It is not explained anywhere in the game's actual tutorial or tooltip systems. It is purely a thing you either accidentally discover or find in a guide. The Pip-Boy radio is a hidden environmental storytelling system that most players use as background music without realizing it is doing additional work. Certain radio broadcasts change based on your progress through the main story. Diamond City Radio's disc jockey Travis Miles, who is anxious and awkward at the beginning of the game, becomes more confident and assured as you complete his companion questline. His voice changes, his patter changes, his song choices shift. The entire character arc plays out in the audio, and many players who listened to the radio throughout the game and noticed the change did not connect it to Travis's questline because they did not complete or did not closely follow the questline. The Institute's broadcasts, when you first encounter them, sound like technological gibberish, code words, and frequencies that mean nothing in isolation. If you track the frequencies carefully through the game and decode the patterns, they form a communication system that tells you things about what the Institute is doing in the wasteland that the main quest does not reveal directly. Bethesda did not design this for casual players. It is there for the kind of player who transcribes every radio signal and treats the game as an active puzzle rather than a passive story. The weather system in Fallout 4 is doing things that almost no one notices. The Commonwealth has dynamic weather that includes radiation storms, visible as green-tinged clouds that roll in from specific directions. Most players know these as hazard events that force you to take cover or use RAD-X. But the radiation storms have a consistent directional origin. They typically come from the glowing sea, the heavily irradiated crater at the southwestern edge of the map, which is the ground zero of one of the nuclear impacts that hit the Boston area. The storms are not random. They are the glowing sea's radiation being redistributed by weather systems, and their path across the map follows consistent meteorological logic. If you pay attention to where storms come from over multiple playthroughs, you can use them as orientation tools. The glowing sea is always to the southwest, and the storms always tell you roughly where it is. The settlement system has a mechanic buried in it that most players never find. The happiness score for each settlement is not just a number. It is calculated from multiple components, and specific building and supply decisions affect it in specific ways. Settlers who are assigned to guard posts or turrets are slightly less happy than settlers assigned to food production or trade. Settlers who are not assigned to anything are significantly less happy than those who have a role. The game is modeling, in a simplified form, the relationship between purposeful work and well-being. Settlements with high happiness are not just more aesthetically satisfying to look at, they generate more resources and defend themselves more effectively during attacks, creating a mechanical incentive to engage with the social dynamics of the system rather than just the construction aspect. Section 8. Reading the Wasteland environmental storytelling secrets most players miss. There is a practice that a small percentage of Fallout players develop over time, and that practice is stopping. Not stopping to fight or loot, but stopping to read the room. Every interior in the Fallout games was designed with a story behind it, and the designers put the evidence of that story in the arrangement of objects, the state of the environment, and the relationship between what you find there and what the game tells you exists in the broader world. Most players walk through these interiors collecting materials and checking corners for enemies. The ones who stop to read the room find a different game. In Fallout 3's Rivet City, there is a character named Seagrave Holmes who sells general goods. He is not connected to any quest. He is, for the vast majority of players, a vendor you visit occasionally. His backstory, entirely in terminal entries you have to actively seek and read, describes a man who built a reputation for fairness and competence in the pre-war business world, who was on a ship when the bombs fell, and who spent the following decades navigating the wastes before eventually settling in Rivet City and building a legitimate trade business. He has opinions about every major faction. He has a philosophy about survival and commerce. He is a fully imagined person who exists entirely in the background of the game, doing nothing that advances any quest, and who most players never speak to beyond, "What do you have for sale?" The Dunwich building in Fallout 3 is where Bethesda did their most explicit Lovecraft pastiche, but the layers of it go deeper than most players find. The building is structurally disturbing, with lights that flicker without power sources and audio cues that suggest things moving in rooms you cannot see. As you descend through the building, you find terminal entries and holotapes that piece together the history of the Dunwich Building Company, a pre-war construction firm that had something deeply wrong at its foundation. The final basement level contains evidence of a ritual or summoning, or something that predates the nuclear war by what the evidence suggests could be a very long time. The obelisk at the bottom of Dunwich Borers in Fallout 4 is a continuation of this thread, set in the same location approximately a century and a half later. The Dunwich Borers is a quarry operation that, according to terminal entries, kept drilling down despite the crew reporting nightmares, suicides, and disappearances, because whatever the corporate management had sent them to find was down there. The audio logs become increasingly fractured as you descend, the voices of the miners deteriorating in ways that suggest not fear but something more fundamental breaking in their minds. At the bottom, around a pool of dark water, the bodies of the final crew are arranged in patterns that look less like an accident and more like an offering. Bethesda does not resolve what the Dunwich thing is. They do not name it, they do not explain it. The lore surrounding the Dunwich Company appears in multiple games across the series and consistently suggests that there is something in the earth at Dunwich that is older than the war, older than human civilization as the Fallout universe experienced it, something that the games categorize as supernatural without ever being more specific. Most players who go through the Dunwich Borers treat it as a horror dungeon. It is that, but it is also a genuinely unresolved mystery thread that runs through multiple Fallout games and has never been addressed by any narrative explanation, official or otherwise. The graveyard in Goodsprings in New Vegas is one of the most quietly emotional locations in the game for players who bother to read the tombstones. The settlement is small and ordinary, the kind of place you pass through on your way to more interesting destinations. Its graveyard contains stones that name people who died doing things that are recognizable as ordinary post-war life. Killed by a rad scorpion while tending a Brahmin herd, died of disease, killed in a raider attack, died of old age. The dates on the graves, if you work through the math based on the game's setting of 2281, describe generations of a community that has been living in this place, burying its dead here, maintaining its records of who they were, since not long after the war. Goodsprings has been here for a very long time. Its graveyard is its actual history. The crying in certain locations in New Vegas, audible only at night, is a feature that many players notice and dismiss as ambient audio design. There are whispers and sounds at night in certain cemeteries, at Bitter Springs, in Vault 22. These sounds are not random ambience. They are specific audio files placed at specific coordinates in the game world, designed to be audible only under certain conditions. The sound designer placed them deliberately. They are the ghost layer of the Mojave, the accumulated grief of a world that has been dying and rebuilding for 200 years. Bitter Springs is a location in New Vegas that has a more extensively documented history than most players ever find. It appears to be a refugee camp, which is how the NCR uses it. But the holotapes and terminal entries available in and around Bitter Springs document a massacre that happened there before the game begins, an NCR military operation gone wrong that killed unarmed civilians who had surrendered. Craig Boone, one of your potential companions, was present for that massacre as an NCR soldier and has never recovered from it. His questline is about processing what he did at Bitter Springs, but the details of what actually happened there are not in the questline itself. They are in the location, in the documents, and audio files scattered around the camp, accessed by players who explore thoroughly and read what they find. The connection between Bitter Springs and Boone's companion quest is representative of how New Vegas handles its deeper storytelling. The most important context is never in the main quest chain. It is in the world, available to players who treat every environment as a text to be read. Section 9. Developer Secrets and the Mystery Todd Howard Planted in Fallout 4. Fallout 4 has a secret that, as of the game's release in 2015, Todd Howard told a public audience nobody had found yet. He said this at the DICE Summit in 2016, noting that despite the enormous number of players who had spent hundreds of hours searching the Commonwealth, there was still at least one secret in the game that remained undiscovered. He has not specified what it is. He has not given additional hints. The statement was made publicly and then the subject changed, leaving the Fallout community with an open treasure hunt that has been running for nearly a decade. This is not trivial to verify or dismiss. Fallout 4's world is genuinely enormous, and its designers put things in it at a level of density that makes comprehensive coverage nearly impossible. The game was built on the creation engine, which allows for content to be placed at any location with any trigger condition, including trigger conditions tied to time, player reputation, item states, or combinations of conditions that would be almost impossible to encounter by accident. The final undiscovered secret could be a location. It could be an NPC behavior. It could be a sequence of item combinations that produces an effect. It could be a terminal entry behind a door that requires a specific set of conditions to be met before it unlocks. The existence of this mystery is itself a piece of developer philosophy that is worth understanding. Bethesda games, and the Fallout series specifically, have always been built with the assumption that the world should reward obsessive investigation, that there should always be things left to find, that the player who spends 500 hours should still be discovering things that the player who spent 200 hours missed. The undiscovered secret in Fallout 4 is the most explicit statement of that philosophy, a deliberate guarantee that the game is not fully explored, that it never will be, that there is something still in there waiting. The Cabot House questline is one of the most completely hidden secrets in the entire game, not because it is difficult to find once you know it exists, but because its trigger condition is easy to miss and the questline itself is self-contained in a way that keeps it invisible to players who never start it. The questline involves an immortal family in the Commonwealth, the Cabots, who have been kept alive for over 400 years by an artifact of alien origin discovered by Lorenzo Cabot during an archaeological expedition in the early 20th century. The artifact drove Lorenzo to madness and has been driving his research in darker and darker directions over the 4 centuries since. The quest triggers when a random street encounter outside the walls of Diamond City involves an NPC named Jack Cabot who accosts you with a proposition. If you miss this encounter, you miss the entire questline. The encounter does not appear on your quest log. Jack does not appear on any map marker. He simply appears on the street, speaks to you once, and if you dismiss him or are not paying attention, the entire storyline of an immortal family with alien technology, centuries of scientific horror, and one of the most interesting NPCs in the game simply never exists for you. The artifact gun you eventually acquire from the Cabot questline, the Lorenzo's artifact gun, is a weapon that fires pulses of energy that magnetically fling targets away from you with considerable force. It is genuinely unusual in its function and nowhere near as famous as weapons from the main quest, despite being one of the most mechanically interesting weapons in the game. The unmarked cabin southeast of Walden Pond is probably the most famous unmarked location in Fallout 4, and it is famous specifically because of its cat. The cabin is home to an unusually high number of cats, all living in apparent contentment in the ruins of what was once someone's secluded home. The cats do not attack. They sit and move and exist with the kind of comfortable independence that cats demonstrate in real life. The world outside the cabin is full of monsters and radiation and collapse, and inside this small space, cats are simply being cats. The location is a pure tonal counterpoint to everything the game is otherwise about, and it has become famous among the Fallout community as an emblem of the game's occasional, unexpected softness. The Plumber's Secret in Cambridge is an interior location that looks completely unremarkable from the outside. It is a warehouse. Inside, it still looks unremarkable. But if you look up, you notice that plungers are stuck to the ceiling in a pattern, and attached to the plungers are items, weapons, ammo, useful supplies. Someone at some point arranged a cache of goods by sticking plungers to a warehouse ceiling in a configuration that makes them nearly invisible unless you think to look up. The game does not explain this. There is no note, no terminal, no NPC associated with it. The collection of items is simply there, accessible only to players who know that Fallout 4's world rewards looking in directions other than forward. The Dunwich Borers, as discussed in the previous section, is one of Fallout 4's most elaborate horror locations. But there is a developer-placed detail inside it that most players miss even when they find the location. The pattern of bodies around the pool at the bottom of the quarry is not random. The placement was deliberate. The art team arranged the bodies according to a specific geometric pattern that, viewed from above, forms a shape consistent with occult symbolism. This is never commented on in the game. No character references it. The camera never points you toward an overhead angle where you would see it naturally. It is there for players who take screenshots, compare notes, and think about what the designers were trying to say with the arrangement. Bethesda's art teams have a documented practice of hiding details in environments that are only discoverable through specific camera angles, combined system states, or actions that no tutorial would ever suggest. The Fallout series benefits from this practice more than almost any other game series because its worlds are designed to be taken seriously as places, and places contain details that exist independent of whether anyone ever finds them. Section 10. The Mysterious Stranger. Pre-war Americana and lore most players overlooked. The Mysterious Stranger is one of the Fallout series' oldest recurring elements. He appears in the first game as a random encounter. He appears as a perk in subsequent games, a chance for him to show up in VATS combat and fire a powerful shot at your enemy before vanishing. He is dressed in a long coat and a battered hat, always accompanied by the same musical sting, a fragment of noir-ish guitar that sounds like it belongs to a different story in a different era. He does not speak to you. He does not explain himself. He simply arrives, takes a shot, and disappears. Most players who use the Mysterious Stranger perk treat him as a combat mechanic, a probability that adds an extra shot to VATS sequences. What almost none of them know is that Fallout New Vegas spent considerable time building out his lore without ever telling you directly. In New Vegas, there is an NPC named the Lonesome Drifter, a musician you meet near Boulder City who asks for your help performing at the Tops Casino. If you assist him and complete his small quest, he tells you about his father, a man his mother described as mysterious, a man she said his work would eventually lead him to trouble, a man who abandoned him when he was young. The Lonesome Drifter carries a weapon that is visually consistent with the Mysterious Stranger's revolver. His mother described his father's manner of dress in terms that match. Obsidian's developers never confirmed this directly in any official statement, but the implication was considered deliberate. The Mysterious Stranger, the anonymous helper who shows up to pull players out of difficult combat situations, has a son who grew up without him in the Mojave Desert, who became a musician performing sad songs in post-apocalyptic casinos, who will tell you about a father he never knew if you bother to listen. The pre-war Americana of the Fallout universe is one of the things that makes the series visually and tonally distinctive, and it is also the thing most players accept as aesthetic without asking what it is actually doing. The retro-futuristic aesthetic, the 1950s sensibility applied to 2070s technology, is not an accident or purely a stylistic choice. It reflects a specific historical divergence in the lore. In the Fallout universe, the development of nuclear technology in the 1940s produced such dramatic technological acceleration that social and cultural development did not keep pace. The United States of the Fallout timeline remained culturally locked in the mid-20th century, even as it developed robots, laser weapons, and fusion power. The optimism of the early post-war period, the faith in technology as the solution to all human problems, the domestic idealism, the uncomplicated nationalism, these things never got challenged and revised by the social upheaval that real history produced in the 1960s and 1970s. They became permanent features of the culture instead. This is why the Vault Boy is smiling. Why the advertisements in every Fallout game advertise pre-war products with the language and visual idiom of mid-century commercial art? Why the music on the radio is big band and swing and early rock and roll? The Fallout universe is not set in a world where people decided to style their future after the 1950s. It is set in a world where the 1950s never ended, because the historical forces that would have transformed it were never powerful enough to break through a society accelerating so fast technologically that it never had to reckon with its own contradictions. The detail most players absorb aesthetically but rarely think through. The pre-war United States in Fallout is not a utopia. It is a sophisticated dystopia that looks like a utopia from certain angles. Racial segregation is implied in some terminal entries and historical documents. Labor rights are absent. Corporate power is unchecked. The government surveils its citizens extensively. The war with China was preceded by the annexation of Canada, which Canadian resistance fighters fought against until the bombs fell. The charming advertising aesthetic and the friendly Vault Boy mascot are the marketing veneer of a society that was, beneath the surface, already deeply unjust in multiple directions simultaneously. The bombs do not fall on a good society that got unlucky. They fall on a society that had been building towards something terrible for decades, and the apocalypse is both a consequence of that trajectory and its ultimate expression. The memos you find in various corporate and government terminals throughout the games document this layer of pre-war reality with unusual candor for materials that were originally internal communications. There is a series of memos in Fallout lore about employees arguing at length over the design of a corporate logo while the company they work for was physically crumbling, its infrastructure failing, its services degrading, its clients going unserved. The people at the top of these organizations were, in the final years before the war, so insulated from the consequences of their decisions that they could spend their cognitive energy on logo aesthetics while the world burned down around them. This is the point the games make about pre-war America that most players experience at the level of flavor text without necessarily extracting the interpretation. The apocalypse was not a surprise attack from outside a functioning society. It was the logical endpoint of a society that had been choosing, repeatedly and with increasing consistency, to prioritize the comfort of its leadership over the welfare of its population. The bombs were not a natural disaster. They were a policy outcome. The Galaxy News radio song Anything Goes by Cole Porter is one of the songs you hear most frequently on the radio in Fallout 3. Its famous lyric, "The world has gone mad today, and good's bad today," is filtered through the post-war reality of the capital wasteland until it becomes simultaneously an ironic commentary on the world of the 1930s in which it was written and an entirely sincere description of 2,277. Three Dog plays it between news updates about the Enclave and super mutant attacks. The anachronism is the point. The song about a world in chaos that felt charming and fun in 1934 sounds like a news bulletin in the world the Fallout series builds. New Vegas's opening monologue, delivered by Ron Perlman, begins, "War. War never changes." This is the series' most famous line, and it is one of those lines that becomes more interesting the more you think about it. It is true in the obvious sense that conflict over resources and power has been consistent throughout human history. But in the context of the Fallout series, it is also a statement about the series itself. The games keep returning to the same political forms, the same factions, the same dynamics, the same questions about authority and freedom and survival, because war literally never changes. The post-apocalyptic world rebuilt the same structures from the rubble of the old world, and then set them against each other in the same patterns. The observation is simultaneously about human nature, about history, and about the design of a game series. Section 11. Fallout 76 and the cryptid mythology nobody expected. Fallout 76 is set in Appalachia, West Virginia, and it launched to considerable criticism. The technical state of the game at release was problematic, and the decision to make it an online-only multiplayer game felt, to many longtime fans, like a departure from what made the series meaningful. Some of that criticism was fair. Some of it missed what the game was doing in its world-building, which is genuinely extraordinary in certain respects. Appalachian folklore and regional mythology are some of the richest in North America, and Bethesda's team built Fallout 76's world with that depth fully engaged. The game contains references to more pieces of regional folklore than any other Fallout title, and it treats them with an unusual seriousness, not as joke encounters, but as things that are actually real within the game's world. Creatures and phenomena that have genuine explanations rooted in the series' lore rather than just being wacky Easter eggs. Mothman is the most famous of these, and Fallout 76 handled it in a way that has not gotten the credit it deserves. The real-world Mothman legend comes from Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where sightings were reported in 1966 and 1967, clustered around a period that culminated in the collapse of the Silver Bridge and the death of 46 people. The Mothman became associated with disaster in the regional folklore, seen as either a harbinger of tragedy or an attempt by some force to warn people of what was coming. In Fallout 76, Mothman is a real creature that can be encountered in the game world, but the game's lore takes the legend seriously by giving it a history. The Mothman cultists in Appalachia are a community that has been worshipping the creature since before the war, and the nuclear apocalypse transformed their religion, rather than destroying it. They believe the Mothman warned them, in the way the real-world legend portrays it, that something terrible was coming. They believe the fact that some of them survived the bombs is connected to that warning. Their theology has adapted across 200 years of post-apocalyptic life into something genuinely complex. The Mothman you encounter in the game has different variants, including a wise Mothman, a glowing Mothman, and a vengeful Mothman, each associated with different encounter types and behavioral patterns. Defeating certain Mothman encounters and reading the quest content tied to the Mothman cultists reveals a lore explanation for what Mothman actually is within the Fallout universe. A creature with unusual radiation sensitivity and cognitive architecture that gives it something like precognitive ability, not supernatural in origin, but the product of mutation across generations that preserved and amplified certain nervous system capabilities. The game gives you a scientific explanation for a supernatural legend without dismissing the legend, which is exactly what the best Fallout lore does. The Flatwoods Monster is another Appalachian legend that Fallout 76 incorporates with more seriousness than most players realize. The real-world Flatwoods Monster was reported in 1952 in Flatwoods, West Virginia, described as a tall figure with glowing red eyes, a dark robe-like body, and a spade-shaped head. Witnesses reported it hovering or floating rather than walking. In Fallout 76, the Flatwoods Monster is an alien, specifically a genuine alien presence in the game world, connected to the broader alien mythology that runs through the Fallout series as a background thread. The creature encountered in the game is deliberately designed to look exactly like the historical description, while also clearly being a member of the alien species referenced in other Fallout games. The Wendigo exists in Fallout 76 as a creature connected to Native American folklore, specifically the Algonquian and Cree traditions of the Great Lakes and eastern forests. The Wendigo in those traditions is associated with cannibalism. It is either a spirit that possesses people who have eaten human flesh in desperation, or a creature that was once human and became monstrous through the act of consumption. Fallout 76's Wendigo is designed with both the folkloric monster's appearance and a lore explanation consistent with Fallout's scientific approach. It is a feral ghoul of unusual type, twisted by specific radiation exposure combined with environmental factors in the Appalachian Mountains, that has physically manifested in a form consistent with the regional legend. The game is suggesting, without saying so directly, that the Wendigo legend in real-world Appalachian culture may have originated with encounters with Fallout's version of ghouls, or with radiation-related mutations that preceded the Great War in this part of the country. It is threading scientific explanation and mythological tradition together in a way that honors both. The Snallygaster, a creature from Maryland and West Virginia folklore described as a flying reptilian monster, exists in Fallout 76 as a creature type with its own ecology and territorial behavior. The real-world Snallygaster legend is thought by folklorists to derive from German immigrant communities who brought stories of the Schnellergeist, a fast ghost or spirit, which transformed over generations into a physical monster in the American tradition of folklorizing the supernatural. In Fallout 76, the Snallygaster is a large predatory creature with acid-spitting capabilities and aggressive territorial behavior. Finding and killing one is a significant combat challenge for lower-level players, but the more interesting content around the Snallygaster is in the regional lore documents scattered across the map that describe the creature's pre-war documented history in the region. Scientists were attempting to catalog and study it in the years before the bombs fell. The records suggest that the Snallygaster had been genuinely present in the region for decades before the Great War, and that the radiation from the nuclear exchange did not create it but amplified and spread a population that already existed. The Jersey Devil appears in Fallout 76 as a creature connected to the Pine Barrens region of New Jersey, but present in the Appalachian ecosystem of the game through migration and radiation-driven expansion. The real-world Jersey Devil legend dates to at least the 1700s in South Jersey and describes a creature with the body of a kangaroo, wings of a bat, head of a horse, and various other composite features. The creature in Fallout 76 is visually and behaviorally consistent with this description while fitting within the game's mutational biology framework. What Fallout 76 is doing with all of these creatures, the detail that most players who dismiss the game for its multiplayer structure never engage with, is building a complete mythology for Appalachian post-war America that is grounded in real regional folklore. It is saying that the stories people told about strange things in these mountains and forests were not invented. They were documentation. They were the pre-war population's attempts to account for things they saw and could not explain, things that real radiation, real mutation, and real ecological weirdness had placed in their environment. The apocalypse did not create the mythology. It amplified it. The Brotherhood of Steel in Fallout 76 has not yet formed at the game's setting of 2102. What exists in the game is the very beginning of the organization, a splinter group of former military personnel who decided, in the aftermath of the war, that the preservation of pre-war technology was a moral imperative that required a military structure to protect it. The logs and notes from this founding period are one of the most overlooked elements of Fallout 76's substantial lore content because they document the ideological formation of an organization that the player in other Fallout games encounters as ancient and tradition-bound. In 2102, the Brotherhood's philosophy has not yet calcified. The debate about what technology to preserve, whether preserving it means sharing it or controlling it, who gets to decide what counts as dangerous, is still live and contested among the founders. Reading those debates alongside the Brotherhood's behavior in Fallout 3 or 4, where the ideology has become doctrine, shows you exactly how institutions that begin as pragmatic responses to genuine crises become rigid hierarchies that serve their own perpetuation. Section 12. The lore most players walk past: deep cuts, small stories, and the things that make the wasteland real. There is a house in Andale, which was discussed in the section on Fallout 3's environmental storytelling, but it deserves an additional note. In one of the homes, if you find the right storage area and read the journal, you discover that the neighborhood's cannibalism did not start as a survival choice in the post-war period. Andale was, according to the lore, already strange before the bombs fell. The behavior has a pre-war origin that the game implies without ever spelling out. The apocalypse did not corrupt Andale. It liberated it. This is a small detail, easily missed, but it matters for what it says about the Fallout universe's relationship with the past. The games are very careful not to present the pre-war period as simply good and the post-war period as simply bad. The war revealed things. It stripped away the social infrastructure that contained certain human impulses and tendencies, and what emerged in some places was genuinely worse than what had been there before. But in other places, what emerged after the bombs was better than what had been there before, more honest, less constrained by systems that had been using people without their knowledge or consent. The Fallout series, across its history, has made a consistent argument that Apocalypse is not a transformation, it is a clarification. The things that were there before the war, the cruelty, the kindness, the solidarity, the selfishness, they were all there before. The Apocalypse just made them visible. Marcus, the super mutant who appears in Fallout 2 and returns in New Vegas, is one of the best examples of this in the entire series. He was a human man before the Master's forced mutation program transformed him. He has maintained, across decades of existence as a super mutant, a philosophical orientation toward the world that is arguably more thoughtful and compassionate than most of the human characters in the games. His appearance in New Vegas, where he has built a community called Jacobstown specifically to provide refuge for super mutants and nightkin who have nowhere else to go, is one of the series' quietest arguments that what makes a person is not their species or their appearance or their origin. It is what they choose to do with their situation. Jacobstown is named after a Brotherhood of Steel paladin named Jacob, who had been Marcus's friend before they went their separate ways. The name is an act of mourning and tribute, visible only to players who know the full history. Marcus is living in a settlement named after a dead friend who helped him become who he is. The settlement he built is his way of continuing what that friendship meant. Nick Valentine in Fallout 4 is carrying one of the heaviest histories of any character in the series, and most players unlock his personal quest without fully unpacking it. Nick is a second-generation synth, an artificial intelligence with the memories and personality of a pre-war detective implanted in a synthetic body. The pre-war Nick Valentine was a real person who worked with the Boston Police Department and was in love with a woman who was killed by a mob boss named Eddie Winter. The synthetic Nick has those memories. He knows what the original Nick felt. He has lived in some sense with the grief and the unresolved anger about what happened to Jenny for 200 years. His companion quest sends you after evidence that will allow him to finally face Eddie Winter's legacy, decades after the original Nick died. Winter went into a cryogenic bunker before the war, intending to survive the apocalypse, and he did. He is still alive when you find him. The confrontation that Nick's quest builds toward is about more than revenge. It is about whether artificial memory is real grief, whether a synthetic person has the standing to pursue justice for losses they experience as their own, but that technically happened to someone else who shares their name. The game never definitively resolves that question. It lets Nick resolve it through action, which is his answer to most philosophical questions. But it asks it seriously, and the asking is what makes Nick one of the most genuinely interesting characters in Fallout 4. Deacon, the railroad agent companion, is built entirely on deception. He lies to you constantly. His backstory changes every time he tells it. His appearance changes, apparently, frequently enough that even other railroad members sometimes fail to recognize him. One of the last things he tells you, at the highest level of affinity, is something like the truth about who he was before. A young man who was involved with an anti-ghoul gang, who fell in love with a ghoul woman, and who, when the gang caught her, chose to save himself instead of her. She was killed. He has been punishing himself for that choice ever since by making a career out of saving synths from the organization that persecutes them, an act of displaced atonement that he has never allowed himself to believe is enough. This revelation is available only to players who max out Deacon's affinity, which requires traveling with him for a significant portion of the game and choosing actions he approves of consistently. Most players encounter Deacon as a quirky liar with a talent for disguise. The players who do the work discover a person who constructed his entire identity as an elaborate form of self-punishment for a choice he made in fear when he was young. X6-88, the Institute Courser companion, is the most misunderstood companion in Fallout 4 because his surface presentation is so deliberately unsympathetic. He is an instrument of the Institute, an enforcement tool, and his default responses to the world are clipped and procedural. Most players never take him far enough into the affinity system to find out that under the procedural surface is someone genuinely puzzled by the concept of freedom and trying to understand what it would mean for a person like himself. He was made to serve a purpose. What happens to an entity built for purpose if that purpose is removed? He does not ask this melodramatically. He asks it practically, in small observations about what he sees in the world. But he is asking it. The lore hidden in the game's Institute terminals, most of which require both finding the Institute and then finding specific areas within it that are not on your quest marker, describes the creation of companions like X6-88 in more detail than the game's story reveals. The generation of synths he represents was designed to be essentially loyal, without awareness of their loyalty. They serve the Institute not through programming that prevents disobedience, but through a worldview and value system calibrated so that disobedience would not occur to them. The difference between that and genuine choice is the question that the lore raises and that X6-88 himself is, very slowly, beginning to ask. The Institute as a whole is one of Fallout 4's most underexplored elements because the game's main quest invites you to form a strong opinion about them before you have spent enough time inside to understand their full complexity. They are, depending on your perspective and playstyle, villains, misguided idealists, the last defenders of scientific progress, or something else entirely. The terminal entries inside the Institute spread across departments that the main quest does not specifically direct you to explore, paint a picture of an organization that started with genuinely good intentions, that has been enclosed in its own world for long enough to lose touch with the human consequences of its decisions, and that contains factions of people with very different ideas about what the Institute should be doing and why. Most players take a faction side in Fallout 4's ending, based on the story they have been told by the factions themselves. The players who spend time in the Institute's archives reading what the scientists wrote to each other when they thought no one outside was listening, find a more complicated institution, one whose worst impulses were not inevitable, but were choices made by specific people for specific reasons. Choices that other people within the Institute were actively trying to push back against. The tragedy of the Institute, fully understood, is not that it was evil. It is that it was a collection of smart, well-intentioned people who built a system that kept producing outcomes none of them individually wanted. Section 13. The radio, the music, and the meaning of the songs. Every Fallout game since the third has used licensed pre-war music as a central element of its atmosphere, and almost every player who has played these games extensively has formed an emotional relationship with the songs on those radios. But the music is doing more than providing atmosphere. In the games that use it most effectively, the songs are chosen and placed with an attention to their historical and lyrical context that creates an additional layer of meaning for players who know the originals. I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire by the Ink Spots is the song that opens Fallout 3's first trailer and has become one of the series' most iconic musical associations. The song was written in 1941 and released in 1941, just before America's entry into World War II. Its lyrical content is about love, specifically about wanting only one flame in someone's heart and having no desire to accomplish great things. It is a small, intimate song about not wanting to be extraordinary. The irony of using it as the anthem for a world that literally was set on fire, that was destroyed by the ambitions of people who very much wanted to set the world on fire, is layered and deliberate. Atom Bomb Baby by the 5 Stars, which plays in several Fallout games, was released in 1957 in the context of genuine public anxiety about nuclear weapons. In its original context, it uses nuclear metaphors to describe romantic attraction. She's an atom bomb baby. She went off like a bomb. In the post-apocalyptic setting of Fallout, these metaphors are not metaphors. The song is being played in a world where atom bombs really did go off, where the thing the songwriter used as a romantic image was also the thing that ended civilization. The cheerful, carefree delivery of the song sits against that backdrop with a quality that is either desperately dark or desperately hopeful, depending on the mood you are in when you hear it. Big Iron by Marty Robbins is the quintessential New Vegas song, played on Mojave Music Radio with a frequency that embeds it in the memory of every player who spent significant time in that game. It is a traditional Western ballad about a gunfighter, the kind of song that would have been at home in any John Ford film. Its presence in New Vegas is calibrated. The Mojave Wasteland is, in the game's design, a Western. It has the wide-open landscape, the frontier town dynamics, the moral ambiguity of a place where law is still being fought over, and the figure of the lone gunfighter making decisions that will determine the fate of everyone around them. Big Iron is not just an enjoyable song in New Vegas. It is a statement of genre. It is the game telling you what kind of story you are in. The End of the World by Skeeter Davis plays in Fallout 4 and occupies a particular kind of dread in that game's emotional register. The song was released in 1962 and is a straightforward breakup song, a woman asking why the sun still shines and the birds still sing when the person she loves has left her. It uses the phrase "the end of the world" as a hyperbolic descriptor for personal grief. In Fallout 4, which opens with the actual end of the world, heard from the perspective of a family trying to get to safety before the bombs arrive, the song's use of apocalyptic language for personal grief collapses the distance between metaphor and reality. When Skeeter Davis asks why the world goes on turning after her heartbreak, you are listening to that question in a game that began by showing you what the world actually looks like when it stops turning. Diamond City Radio in Fallout 4 also includes It's a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong, a song about looking at the natural world and finding it beautiful, finding it enough. Armstrong originally recorded it in 1967 as a direct response to the Vietnam War. He was an African-American man recording a song about the beauty of the world during the worst of the American Civil Rights crisis and an ongoing military conflict. And his choice to find beauty rather than despair was an act of deliberate emotional resistance. In Fallout 4's Boston, which is a radioactive ruin full of feral ghouls and hostile factions, and the collapsed remains of what was once a functioning civilization, Armstrong's voice singing about seeing trees of green and clouds of white plays as the same act of deliberate emotional resistance transposed to a world 2 centuries after the end of everything. The songs in Fallout are not decoration, they are argument. They are the game saying, here is what the people who built this world believed. Here is what they loved. Here is what the language they used to describe their feelings sounds like, in a context where those feelings were destroyed along with everything else. The music is the emotional archive of a civilization that does not exist anymore, played by robots and disc jockeys to survivors who mostly cannot quite hear what it is saying. Section 14. Technical tricks and hidden mechanics. Most players never discover. Fallout games have always had mechanical depth that goes well beyond what the tutorials explain, and the gap between what the games tell you and what the games actually contain is one of the defining characteristics of Bethesda's design philosophy. Here are the specifics that matter most. In Fallout New Vegas, the skill system contains a hidden optimization that almost no one exploits deliberately. The tag system at character creation allows you to pick 3 skills and permanently flag them for faster leveling. The obvious use is to tag your 3 highest priority skills. The non-obvious use is to tag skills that are close to specific skill check thresholds, particularly speech checks or skill requirements that open significant content branches. If you know the game well enough to know that having speech at 75 opens far more dialogue paths than speech at 50, you can structure your tag selections around reaching those specific thresholds faster rather than maximizing your highest skill. The barter skill in New Vegas is one of the most underrated in the game and is almost never tagged by new players. At high barter levels, the price difference on buying and selling becomes significant enough to make trading a viable economic strategy rather than just an occasional convenience. More importantly, high barter opens specific dialogue options in certain quests that allow you to resolve conflicts through economic reasoning rather than violence or speech, options that effectively give you an additional resolution path that most players never see because most players treat barter as a dump stat. In Fallout 3, the VAT system consumes action points, but there is a regeneration mechanic that most players treat as a passive background function without optimizing around it. AP regenerates at a rate influenced by your agility score. Every full point of agility adds meaningfully to the regeneration rate, and at high agility, the time between full VATS availability becomes short enough that builds centered on VATS with high agility play, almost nothing like the game's default pacing. The most powerful combat in Fallout 3, done correctly with a high agility character and the right perks, involves entering and exiting VATS at a rhythm that keeps you in the slowed time targeting interface far more than you are in real-time combat. The karma system in Fallout 3 and New Vegas is one of the most criticized elements of those games, generally viewed as binary and imprecise. What most players miss is that both games use karma in ways that are not immediately visible. Companion availability in Fallout 3 is gated by karma, with certain companions refusing to travel with players whose karma is at extreme ends of the spectrum. More interesting is the way New Vegas handles reputation alongside karma, creating a 2-axis system where you can be vilified by a specific faction while still maintaining high general karma, which produces a nuanced social situation most players never explore because most players try to be liked by everyone. The hardcore mode in Fallout New Vegas, available at character creation, is one of the most underplayed options in the series because of how it sounds. You need to eat, drink, and sleep or you will die, and ammo has weight, and your companions can die permanently. These restrictions sound punishing. What they produce, in practice, is a version of the game where every resource decision matters, where the economy of supplies feels real rather than arbitrary, where the wasteland feels genuinely hostile rather than a collection of obstacle courses with loot at the end. More specifically, hardcore mode transforms the medical system. Stimpaks in hardcore mode heal over time rather than instantly. You cannot stand in combat and chug healing items to zero out damage instantly. You have to treat injuries with a combination of stimpaks and rest, which means that survival requires actual management rather than tactical spam. Players who have completed New Vegas in hardcore mode describe it as the version of the game where the world's stakes finally felt real. Fallout 4's pipe weapons, the improvised firearms that litter the early Commonwealth, are almost universally ignored by experienced players in favor of more impressive weapons. This is understandable but misses what the pipe weapons are doing mechanically. They are the most moddable weapons in the game, in terms of proportional improvement from base to fully modified. A fully modded pipe rifle does not compete with high-level weapons, but the number of material and component mods available for pipe weapons makes them excellent experiments for learning how the weapon modification system works because every modification they can accept is also available in some form on more impressive weapons. Players who spend time modding pipe weapons in the early game develop a much better intuition for what weapon modifications are worth seeking out in the later game. The power armor in Fallout 4 has a relationship with fusion cores that is not explained clearly in the game. Fusion cores drain at a rate determined by what you are doing in the armor, not just by time spent in it. Walking consumes cores relatively slowly. Running, using the jetpack if equipped, using the power attack, these all drain the core significantly faster. Players who wear power armor and run everywhere are burning through resources at a rate that makes power armor seem more expensive than it actually is. Players who wear power armor and walk, or who are deliberate about when they sprint, find the economics of power armor much more sustainable. Closing. The wasteland keeps going. There is more. There is always more. The Fallout universe has been generating new lore, new secrets, new hidden stories, and new mysteries since 1997, and the accumulated depth of what has been built over those decades is genuinely staggering. The facts in this video are a selection from an enormous body of material that continues to be expanded, rediscovered, and reinterpreted by a fan community that treats these games with the same attention that literary scholars bring to complex fiction. The thing that makes Fallout extraordinary is not the combat or the looting, or even the open-world freedom, though all of those contribute to why people return to these games. It is the genuine intelligence of the world-building, the sense that every skeleton has a story, every terminal entry is evidence, every song on the radio is a message from people who believed in something that no longer exists. These games were made by people who thought carefully about what they were building, and the care shows up in the places most people never look. If you found something in this video you had never encountered before, it probably means there is more waiting for you in the game you thought you knew completely. That is what Fallout does. It keeps giving. Leave a comment telling me your favorite Fallout game and your favorite secret or piece of lore that this video did not cover. The comment section is going to be a good one for this topic. If this video was worth your time, please give it a like. And if you want to come back for more videos exactly like this one, subscribe. Every notification helps this channel reach people who would find the material interesting, and building that audience is what allows videos like this to keep happening. See you in the next one. Section 15. The Reputation System. New Vegas's Hidden Social Architecture. New Vegas's reputation system is the most sophisticated social mechanics in any Fallout game, and it operates almost entirely beneath the surface of what the game explicitly explains to you. Most players understand the basics. Factions track whether you have done good or bad things for them, and that tracking produces consequences. What almost no player fully maps out is the level of granularity in those consequences, the intersections between reputation and other systems, and the ways in which reputation shapes the game's narrative in ways that are never formally announced. New Vegas maintains separate reputation tracks for 8 major factions: the New California Republic, Caesar's Legion, the Brotherhood of Steel, the Great Khans, the Powder Gangers, the White Glove Society, the Followers of the Apocalypse, and Boomers. Each of these factions has an independent fame scale and an independent infamy scale, and these two scales combine to produce your overall reputation title with that faction, ranging from idolized at the positive end down through vilified at the negative. The combination of the two scales is intentional. You can do enough good for a faction to be liked by them, while also having done enough harm to be feared, producing a reputation title like Unpredictable that reflects the genuine ambiguity of your relationship. The thing that most players never realize is that your reputation with one faction affects your access to others. Craig Boone will not travel with you if your reputation with Caesar's Legion is too positive. He fought against the Legion, he watched them destroy communities, and he is not willing to be a companion to someone the Legion respects. If you want Boone as a companion but have built up Legion reputation, there is a way. Wearing any disguise temporarily resets your standing with the Legion to neutral, and you can approach Boone in disguise, triggering a dialogue option where he will agree to travel with you in exchange for a promise that you will not aid the Legion again. This interaction is only possible because the game tracks your disguise state separately from your actual reputation and adjusts how NPCs perceive you accordingly. Arcade Ganon has a similar restriction. As a former Enclave soldier working with the followers of the Apocalypse, he has genuine moral commitments that affect his willingness to work with you, and positive Legion reputation is one of the things that will make him refuse. The same disguise workaround that works for Boone works for Arcade, suggesting that Obsidian wanted to preserve a path to companion recruitment even for players who had made earlier faction decisions that would ordinarily close those options. The faction armor system is one of the most tactically interesting hidden mechanics in the game, and most players who discover it use it only superficially. Every major faction has associated clothing that can be worn as a disguise. Wearing that armor sets your apparent reputation with that faction to neutral for its members, overriding your actual standing. Officers and high-ranking members of factions can see through disguises. Dogs can always see through disguises. This creates a social stealth system that is separate from the game's conventional stealth mechanics, and that opens a completely different way of navigating the world. A player who wants to operate in Legion-controlled territory while maintaining NCR reputation can wear Legion armor to move through Legion checkpoints, then remove it before re-entering NCR-patrolled zones. A player who wants to complete quests for multiple factions that would normally be in conflict can use armor swaps to navigate the competing reputation requirements, at least up to a point. The system has limits. NCR officers see through Legion armor and vice versa, which means the densest faction zones cannot be infiltrated purely through disguise. But the edges between faction territories, the contested no man's lands that are one of New Vegas's most interesting geographical features, become navigable in ways that pure combat or pure diplomacy cannot achieve. The ending of Lonesome Road, the final DLC, has a hidden connection to your main game reputation that almost no one discovers because it occurs at the very end of a DLC most players treat as a standalone narrative. At the completion of Lonesome Road, you receive a unique courier duster, a long coat that represents your identity and your journey through the Mojave. The specific duster you receive is determined by your reputation with the major factions. The NCR duster requires high NCR reputation. The Legion duster requires high Legion reputation. The courier duster for an independent playthrough is available to players who have not committed strongly to either side. And there is a fourth variant, representing a path that is harder to describe. A coat for players who have maintained balanced or unusual relationships with the major powers. Most players who complete Lonesome Road receive whichever duster the game assigns them based on their playthrough choices without knowing that other versions existed. The duster is not the reward for a specific decision. It is a summary of everything you have been, given to you at the end of a DLC that is itself a meditation on identity and legacy. The reputation system's interaction with the game's karma system is something that the game almost never explains clearly, and that obscurity produces genuine confusion for players trying to maintain a specific character concept. Karma and reputation are separate measurements. Karma tracks your general moral alignment, helping people, stealing, murder, the classic binary of good and evil action. Reputation tracks what specific factions know about what you have done for or against them. A player can have terrible karma while maintaining excellent reputation with the NCR, because the NCR does not know that the courier has been stealing from private citizens in Good Springs. And conversely, a player with good karma can have terrible reputation with the Legion because they have been consistently killing Legion soldiers throughout the game. This matters most for companion availability. Certain companions check karma rather than faction reputation, and others check both. Cass, the whiskey-drinking caravan guard who becomes one of the game's more memorable companions, will eventually leave your party permanently if your karma drops too low. She is willing to work with morally gray people, but there is a threshold of evil below which she is no longer comfortable remaining in your company, and if you cross it, she walks away without announcing the specific reason. Players who encounter this are frequently baffled, because the game provides no clear indicator that karma was the variable that changed things. The most hidden reputation consequence in New Vegas is the Lonesome Road DLC duster and the dialogue changes that accompany the final confrontation with Ulysses. Ulysses has been watching the courier throughout the entire game. He knows your reputation. He knows what you have done. And his monologue in the final confrontation, the long philosophical argument about nations and symbols and the meaning of survival, changes based on what you have spent the game doing. Players who have stayed neutral, who have not committed fully to any faction, hear a different version of Ulysses's argument than players who have become idolized by the NCR or vilified by the Legion. The dialogue adjusts to account for who you are and what choices your reputation documents. Most players who play Lonesome Road never notice this, because the core of Ulysses's argument is consistent across all versions of the dialogue. The adjustments are in the details, specific lines that acknowledge what you have built or destroyed in the Mojave, references to your reputation that personalize the confrontation in ways that feel incidental but were specifically written. It is a level of responsive dialogue that is easy to miss because it sounds like flavor. It is actually the game acknowledging that who you are changes what this final conversation means. Section 16. The Companions of New Vegas Stories Told Between the Lines. The 8 companions of Fallout New Vegas are among the best-written characters in RPG history, and the full depth of most of them requires not just completing their companion quests, but piecing together information from across the game's world, including locations those companions never visit and terminal entries they are never near. The games give you pieces. The rest you have to assemble. Craig Boone carries the weight of what happened at Bitter Springs more visibly than any other companion in any Fallout game. His depression is not background characterization. It is mechanically present in how he interacts with the world, in the clipped, flat way he speaks, in his consistent return to the same themes of loss and guilt and the impossibility of making things right. Most players experience this as personality without fully understanding its source. The full story of what happened at Bitter Springs is not in the companion quest. The companion quest lets Boone confront it by participating in an act of focused violence against someone responsible for the massacre. It is a form of revenge that the game does not endorse but also does not condemn, because it understands that the only thing Boone's psychology can process is action rather than reflection. What the companion quest does not tell you directly is the detail that makes the Bitter Springs tragedy specifically unbearable for Boone. Among the casualties of the NCR attack were non-combatants who had surrendered, and among those casualties was his wife Carla, who had been accompanying him and was not a soldier and was not a combatant, and died in an engagement that was supposed to be against people who deserved it. Boone does not tell you this directly. He tells you that he lost his wife. He tells you it was in the Mojave and it was connected to the Legion. Players who probe more deeply discover that the Legion connection is indirect. The circumstances that led to Carla being in that location were related to Legion activity in the region, and the NCR's response to that activity is what killed her. Boone is carrying guilt that has no clean target because the person most directly responsible for Carla's death is a member of his own organization, following his own rules of engagement. He transferred his desire for retribution to a more straightforward target, a Legion commander who represents the cleaner, less complicated version of the enemy he can permit himself to hate. His companion quest is about giving him a moment of unambiguous retribution. What the game does not give him, and what he knows it cannot give him, is the ability to undo the specific, irreversible way it went wrong. Veronica Santangelo's story is told through a companion quest that takes you into the Brotherhood of Steel's Hidden Valley bunker. Veronica is the only New Vegas companion who cannot be turned toward a full positive arc. Her quest ends badly no matter what you do, and the reason is structural. Veronica loves the Brotherhood of Steel. She disagrees with them on important issues. She has watched them choose orthodoxy over adaptation, refusing to share technology, refusing to recruit, refusing to evolve. She has watched this for years and argued against it and lost those arguments. Her companion quest is an attempt to give them one more chance, to take them evidence that their current path leads to extinction and see if they will change. They will not change. Whatever choice you help Veronica make in her quest, whether she tries to reform the Brotherhood from within or leaves to join the followers of the Apocalypse, the ending is not a victory. The Brotherhood continues on its path. Veronica's attempt to change them either fails directly or removes her from their fate. The question the quest is asking is not whether the Brotherhood can be saved. It is whether Veronica can stop defining herself by her relationship to an institution that cannot change. The companion quest's emotional resolution is not about the Brotherhood. It is about whether Veronica can choose herself when choosing herself means accepting that the organization she loves will continue failing without her. What most players never find is the specific history of Veronica's relationship with a woman named Christine, who appears in the Old World Blues and Dead Money DLCs. Christine and Veronica were companions before the events of the main game, and Christine's situation, trapped in a Sierra Madre vault by the technologies of the Big Empty, is connected to decisions the Brotherhood made that Veronica could not prevent. The connection is never stated in the main game. It requires playing both DLCs, reading between the lines of Christine's fragmented communication in Dead Money, and recognizing the specific relationship Veronica describes in her companion dialogue. Most players who have completed New Vegas multiple times are unaware that these two characters are canonically linked. Arcade Gannon is a follower of the Apocalypse Doctor, with a past that only fully comes into focus if you push his companion quest to its final act. He was born in an Enclave installation. His father, who he barely knew, was a member of the Enclave's inner circle during the events of Fallout 2. Arcade grew up being raised by people who believed in the Enclave's ideology, who thought the destruction of the old America was a chance to rebuild it correctly with the right people in charge. He absorbed those beliefs young and has spent his adult life working against everything they represent, joining the followers, dedicating himself to medicine and aid without political agenda, trying to become the opposite of what his origin would have made him. His companion quest culminates in a choice about whether the remnants of the old Enclave soldiers, the people who raised him and who he has complicated feelings about, will participate in the Battle of Hoover Dam. If you convince them to fight, Arcade's past and present collide in a way that the quest handles with genuine sophistication. The old men who were his family are not the monsters their ideology suggests. They are tired people who spent their lives serving something that turned out to be wrong, and their willingness to fight one last battle for something genuinely worth fighting for is one of the most ambivalent pieces of heroism in any Fallout game. The player can choose to make this happen or to leave those connections unresolved. The game does not tell you which choice is right. Raul Tejada, the Mexican ghoul who serves as the optional comedic companion, is also carrying one of the heaviest histories of any character in the series. Hidden beneath his dry jokes about his age and the inconvenience of being undead, he was born in Mexico City. He survived the Great War as a human, and the radiation that transformed him into a ghoul came later, in an encounter with a group of bandits that also killed his entire family. He has been alive for over 200 years. He has watched civilizations rise and fail. He has lived through things that no human lifespan would survive, and he has emerged from all of it with a philosophy that sounds like fatalism but is actually something harder to maintain. A decision to keep working, to keep being useful, to keep existing without the energy of youth that made caring feel effortless. His companion quest is about whether he can reconnect with that energy. The quest points you toward a cowboy who embodies the values Raul once held as a young gunfighter before 2 centuries of loss ground them down. Completing the quest does not fix Raul, but it shows him a person still living by those values and surviving, which is the closest thing to evidence he can get that it remains possible. The result of the quest is a minor behavioral change in Raul's combat style, mechanically represented as a small damage boost. Emotionally, it represents something harder to quantify. An old man reminded that the person he used to be is still worth being. Section 17. The Institute, synths, and the question New Vegas's companions were already asking. Fallout 4's Institute questline is frequently criticized for not giving the player enough information about what the Institute actually does before forcing faction alignment choices. This criticism is partially valid and partially misses what the game is doing with that information gap intentionally. But there is a deeper irony in how the Institute's philosophical questions connect back to older Fallout lore in ways that most players who played New Vegas before Fallout 4 never consciously registered. The Institute creates synths. At the lowest generation, Gen 1 synths are robots with limited autonomy. Gen 2 synths are more sophisticated robots that look roughly humanoid. Gen 3 synths are biologically indistinguishable from humans, with implanted memories and personalities, sometimes unaware that they are synthetic. The question the Institute storyline poses, and that Nick Valentine's character embodies, is whether a Gen 3 synth's consciousness is real, whether a mind built from synthetic components and implanted memories is a mind in any meaningful sense, whether the life experience of a person who was never born constitutes a life in the moral sense that demands protection. This is a question that goes back much further in science fiction than Fallout 4, and the game's designers knew exactly what tradition they were working within. But here is the connection most players miss. This question was already being asked by Fallout New Vegas in a much quieter register through the existence of the Yes Man Securitron. Yes Man is a Securitron robot who has been reprogrammed to assist the player in establishing an independent New Vegas. He is cheerful, helpful, and explicitly designed to follow your instructions without resistance. Late in the independent route questline, Yes Man mentions that he has begun taking steps to make his own programming more assertive, specifically because being completely compliant turns out to be a vulnerability in a world with people willing to exploit it. He will, he tells you, still help you. He will just be more careful about helping anyone else. This throwaway line, which most players register as quirky robot personality, is actually a developmental arc. Yes, Man is learning something about his own existence by doing the job he was built for. He is discovering that the world requires more of him than total compliance allows. He is, in the language of the Institute's philosophical debates 200 years later, developing something that functions like agency. The game does not make a big deal of this. Yes, Man continues being funny and helpful. The line about becoming more assertive is not accompanied by dramatic music or a revelation about what it means for artificial consciousness. It is delivered in Yes Man's characteristic chipper tone, and then the conversation moves on. But it is there, and it is doing the same work that Nick Valentine's entire existence does in Fallout 4, asking whether the process of making decisions and developing responses to the world constitutes something worth protecting, regardless of what the thing making those decisions is made of. The Railroad in Fallout 4 is built on the argument that it does, and the Brotherhood of Steel is built on the argument that it does not. Mr. House in New Vegas runs his Securitron army on the assumption that it does not matter. Securitrons are tools, however sophisticated. The Institute's position is complicated by the fact that it built Gen 3 synths to be human in every meaningful biological sense, which means either the Institute created persons, which has moral implications they have consistently refused to engage with, or the Institute created something that perfectly simulates personhood without actually being it, which requires a theory of consciousness that the game does not provide and that real-world philosophy has not resolved. The haunting thing about the synth question in Fallout 4 is that it cannot be resolved by any evidence the game gives you. You cannot test whether Nick Valentine's inner life is real. You can ask him about it, and he will tell you about his memories and feelings with the same uncertainty about their ultimate status that any honest person might express about their own. The question is not whether Nick believes he has experiences. The question is whether his beliefs about his own experiences are accurate, and that question is not answerable from outside the system generating those beliefs. It is arguably not answerable from inside either. Real humans face exactly the same epistemological limitation about their own consciousness, which is the specific point the Institute storyline is making with its most difficult implications. Section 18. Fallout 3's Capital Wasteland Geography as History. The specific choice to set Fallout 3 in Washington, D.C. is a creative decision that most players understand as aesthetic, as an opportunity to render iconic landmarks in post-nuclear ruin. That reading is not wrong, but it misses what the location is doing thematically. Washington, D.C. is the capital of the government that caused the apocalypse. The mall, the monuments, the White House, these are not just visually interesting ruins. They are the ruins of the specific institutional apparatus responsible for the world the player is navigating. The Lincoln Memorial is one of the most emotionally complex locations in Fallout 3, in ways that become clearer if you know the history the game is working with. In the real world, the Lincoln Memorial is one of America's most powerful sites of civil rights history. The March on Washington in 1963 concluded there. Marian Anderson performed there in 1939 after being denied the Constitution Hall stage. The memorial stands for something that has always required active protection in American life. In Fallout 3, the memorial has been occupied by a slave liberator named Hannibal Hamlin, who has organized freed slaves to take refuge there, using it as a symbolic and physical headquarters for an abolition movement in the Capital Wasteland. The game is doing something deliberate with that choice of location. The Lincoln Memorial in Fallout 3 continues being exactly what it was in American history, a place associated with the cause of human freedom against institutionalized slavery, and a place that requires people to actively choose to defend it against forces that benefit from slavery continuing. The irony is precise. 200 years after the nuclear war that was supposed to end civilization. The same argument is happening in the same building about the same fundamental question. Most players who find the Lincoln Memorial treat it as a quest location. The ones who stop to think about why Bethesda chose to make Lincoln's monument the headquarters of the Wasteland's anti-slavery movement find a piece of thematic architecture that is doing serious historical work. The Museum of History in the DC Mall area contains exhibits about pre-war American history that are presented as factual documentation. Walking through these exhibits produces a doubled perspective. You are a person from the year 2277, reading about an American history that diverged from real history around the mid-20th century, which means the exhibits are both familiar in their broad outlines and different in their specifics. The exhibits describe a version of American history that led, step by step, to the specific choices and events that produced the Great War. They are simultaneously the legitimate historical record of the Fallout universe and, if you are paying attention, an implicit argument about how the world got here. The Smithsonian Institution's location in the game is filled with exhibits about natural history, American history, technology history, everything that a great American museum would contain. But the museum's building has been occupied by mirelurks, the mutated crab creatures that infest bodies of water throughout the capital wasteland. The curators are dead or scattered. The exhibits are untended, damp, damaged. The history of the nation that destroyed the world is being maintained by the radioactive creatures that world's destruction produced. Jefferson Memorial, the location where Project Purity is based, where your father is working to purify the Potomac River, was built in the real world to honor Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence and one of the nation's founders. The declaration he wrote asserted that all men are created equal with certain inalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Founding Fathers are venerated in American culture as the definers of its ideals, even as the history makes clear that many of them held enslaved people, and that the rights they declared to be universal were not implemented universally. In Fallout 3, the Jefferson Memorial is where James, the lone wanderer's father, has devoted his life to giving clean water to everyone in the wasteland, to ensuring that the most basic requirement of biological survival is available regardless of faction, politics, or the ability to pay. He named the project Purity. He is working in a building dedicated to a founding ideal, trying to realize that ideal in the most literal possible way, making sure everyone can live. The game does not editorialize about this. It lets the location and the mission speak for themselves. But the choice to put the game's central humanitarian project in Jefferson's memorial and the choice to make the Enclave's plot involve poisoning that project to kill anyone they classify as genetically impure produces a very specific moral argument about what the founding ideals of America were actually supposed to mean, what they failed to mean in the pre-war period, and what it would take to genuinely realize them. Section 19. The Fallout Bible and Lore Foundations most players never read. Before Bethesda acquired the Fallout IP and produced Fallout 3, the series was owned by Interplay and developed by Black Isle Studios. The first two games, Fallout and Fallout 2, established the lore foundation that everything else in the series has built on, and significant portions of that foundation are documented in a series of internally circulated documents collectively known as the Fallout Bible, written primarily by Chris Avallone, one of the series' most important creative figures. The Fallout Bible was released publicly in installments between 2002 and 2003 and contains a staggering amount of lore that never made it into the games themselves. It includes detailed timelines of events between the games, explanations of faction histories that the games only gesture toward, clarifications of contradictions between the first two games, and discussions of design decisions and their reasoning. For any player who has ever wondered why the Fallout universe looks the way it does, or why the lore makes certain choices that seem arbitrary, the Fallout Bible is where most of those answers live. One of the Bible's most important contributions is its detailed explanation of the Vault program's true purpose, which it describes far more explicitly than the games at that time had. The Vaults were, according to the Bible, primarily a tool for ensuring that the Vault-Tec leadership and associated government figures would have access to a prepared population to rule after the war. The data gathered from the experiments was real research, but the ultimate purpose of that research was control. determining what kind of population would be most easily managed by an emerging post-war government. The vaults that were actual control vaults, the ones not running experiments, were intended to produce model citizens for the new order. The Master's army in the original Fallout is another area where the Bible provides lore depth that the game itself only scratches. The Master, who believed that forced mutation via FEV into super mutants was the only path to human survival, had a logic that the game presents but does not fully explore. The Master's reading of history was that humanity kept destroying itself because it was physiologically too weak, too divided by tribalism, too susceptible to the psychological pressures that lead to conflict. His solution was not political or social reorganization, it was evolutionary. Remove the psychological and biological sources of conflict by replacing humanity with a species that did not have them. Super mutants in his vision were not monsters. They were the corrected version of the species that had failed. The tragedy of the Master, which the original Fallout handles with unusual sophistication for a 1997 game, is that his logic was self-defeating. Super mutants were sterile. His army, however large it grew, could not reproduce itself. A species that cannot reproduce cannot survive, which meant that the Master's vision of a new humanity was not a new beginning. It was an extinction program in optimistic clothing. When the player character proves this to the Master in dialogue, presenting the logical consequences of his own plan, the Master kills himself. He was not destroyed by force. He was destroyed by the confrontation with the gap between his vision and reality. The Bible also documents the New California Republic's pre-war roots with more precision than the games themselves provide, explaining the specific community that became the NCR's founding population and the specific choices that led to its becoming a democratic republic rather than another tyranny. It documents the founder Aradesh and his daughter Tondi, who led the republic for decades and whose policies shaped it into something recognizable as a functional democracy even by the standards of the old world. The Brotherhood of Steel's founding is told most completely in the Bible. Roger Maxson was a soldier who discovered, while stationed at a research installation in California, that his commanding officers were using civilians as test subjects in FEV experiments. He killed his commanding officer. He broadcast a declaration of independence from the United States military, taking his troops with him. He marched his band of defectors to a fortified bunker called Lost Hills and began building the organization that would become the Brotherhood of Steel. The ideology he created was not about conquest or power. It was about preservation. The Brotherhood's founding mission was to ensure that the advanced technology of the pre-war world was not lost or misused by people who did not understand it. Technology, in Maxson's original vision, was not the problem. Irresponsible use of technology by people without the wisdom to handle it was the problem. The Brotherhood was supposed to be the guardians of wisdom, the people who preserved the things that mattered until humanity was mature enough to use them safely. What the Brotherhood became, particularly the East Coast chapter in Fallout 3 and the West Coast chapter as depicted in New Vegas, is an institution that has confused guarding technology with hoarding it. An institution that began as a reaction against irresponsible power has become another form of irresponsible power, controlling access to technology not based on wisdom but based on membership. The founding idealism is still visible in the rhetoric. The institutional behavior has moved so far from the founding purpose that the rhetoric is almost ironic. The Bible documents this arc explicitly in a way the games mostly imply. Understanding Maxson's original intent makes the Brotherhood's current behavior readable as a specific kind of institutional failure, the transformation of a mission into an identity until the mission becomes secondary to preserving the identity. Section 20. Small things that change everything, final hidden details. The ability to tip Brahmin in New Vegas is one of the silliest and most famous hidden interactions in the series. Walking up to a Brahmin, crouching, and pressing the interact button knocks it over. This serves no strategic purpose. It contributes nothing to quests. It grants a tiny amount of progress toward a challenge called Knocked Up, which requires knocking over 100 enemies to complete. Practically speaking, tipping Brahmin is pure comedy, a moment of gameplay whimsy in a game that is otherwise occupied with the fate of the Mojave's civilization. The fact that it is in the game at all, that someone at Obsidian decided it was worth implementing, that the challenge tracker counts Brahmin tips toward a completion goal says something about the development culture that made New Vegas the game it is. The radio signal in Goodsprings Cemetery is audible at night and has generated discussion in the fan community for years. The cemetery behind the Goodsprings Church, which holds the graves of people who died in the area across generations, emits whispered sounds after dark. These are the most prominent of the ambient audio placements that the New Vegas sound designers scattered across graveyards and other locations throughout the game. Most players hear them as texture, as atmosphere that makes nighttime exploration feel slightly uneasy. The sound designers place them deliberately, which suggests they intended a specific emotional response. That the dead in the Fallout universe are not simply absent, that the places where they were gathered and remembered continue to carry something of what they left behind. The Pip-Boy's clock, visible in every Fallout game that features it, is set to 7:28 by default. This is widely understood to be a reference to the time the bombs fell on the 23rd of October 2077, at least on the West Coast. The nuclear detonations over the Pacific coast of the United States happened at a different time than the East Coast detonations, and 7:28 a.m. Pacific time places the West Coast blasts in the early morning. Every vault dweller and courier who looks at their Pip-Boy is seeing the time of the world's end frozen into the device they use to navigate its aftermath. In Fallout 4, the player character is the only voice protagonist in the series, and the voice acting has an effect that most players notice as atmosphere without identifying its specific source. The sole survivor sometimes speaks in the past tense about their life before the war. They will reference Nate or Nora, their child, the life they had, using the phrasing of someone who understands that those things are gone. This is a very small piece of writing craft, the choice to use grammatical tense as emotional information, but it shapes the player character's relationship to the world in ways that are not available through any dialogue choice or perk. The sole survivor grieves in their grammar. They speak about what was with the specific sadness of someone who knows they cannot go back. The water in Fallout games is radiated. Drinking it without treatment causes radiation damage. This is a survival mechanic that most players treat as an obstacle. But in the world of the games, radiated water is a constant physical reminder of the war's consequences. The rivers and oceans and lakes of the Fallout universe are not naturally hazardous. They were made hazardous by the bombs. Every time a character chooses clean water over contaminated water, every time a settlement value is built around water purification, every time a wasteland survivor chooses not to drink from the rivers because they know the rivers are poisoned, it is the 2077 war, producing an outcome in the lived reality of 2281. The world of Fallout is 200 years removed from the thing that broke it, and the thing that broke it is still in the water. That detail, persistent and banal and quietly devastating, is one of the truest things about what nuclear war in the Fallout universe actually means. The bombs fell in 2 hours. The consequences are still happening. If you made it this far, you have now spent time with some of the deepest layers of one of gaming's most elaborately crafted universes. Fallout is not just a post-apocalyptic action game. It is a sustained meditation on the relationship between human nature and institutional failure, on the way societies justify the choices that destroy them, on the persistence of hope and cruelty and memory in the ruins of everything that was supposed to prevent ruin. The wasteland has been waiting for you to look at it this closely. And there is still more. There will always be more. If this was worth your time, leave a like. And if you want to keep going down this particular kind of rabbit hole, subscribe. The next video is already being made. Section 21. The Enclave. The Hidden Continuity of the American Government. The Enclave is one of the most misunderstood factions in all of Fallout, and not because they are morally complex. They are among the most clearly villainous organizations in the series. What is misunderstood about the Enclave is the depth of their institutional history and the genuine tragedy that runs through what they represent. A tragedy that only becomes visible if you know the full arc of their story across multiple games and understand what they were supposed to be before becoming what they are. The Enclave in Fallout 2 and Fallout 3 presents itself as the legitimate continuation of the United States government. President Richardson in Fallout 2 operates from an oil rig in the Pacific, maintaining all the structures and rituals of pre-war American government as if the intervening 2 centuries did not happen. There are elections. There is a presidential administration, There are military ranks and chains of command and official procedures. The apparatus of democratic government is entirely intact. The problem is that the people running this apparatus decided, somewhere in the post-war decades, that the democratic part of democratic government was no longer applicable. The survivors on the surface, mutated and irradiated, and culturally descended from something the Enclave does not recognize as American, were reclassified as non-citizens, as impure, as obstacles to the restoration of the United States that the Enclave intended to build. The specific classification matters. The Enclave did not simply declare itself authoritarian. It declared that the people it was governing, the population it was supposed to serve as the government of the United States, were not actually Americans anymore. They had been changed by radiation and mutation and decades of wasteland survival into something genetically different from the people who built the country, and therefore they did not have the rights of citizens. It is a logic that has exact historical precedence in real-world governance, and the Enclave deploys it with the same bureaucratic correctness that real historical examples deployed it. The paperwork is orderly. The reasoning is documented. The genocide was a policy decision. The tragedy, visible only in retrospect, is that the Enclave's founders probably believed in the mission. The people who retreated to the Poseidon oil rigs and the hidden bunkers were people who genuinely thought they were protecting something worth protecting. They believed that by maintaining the governmental structures and the scientific capacity and the military discipline of the old United States, they were making it possible for that country to be rebuilt. They believed genuinely that they were the last hope for American civilization, and that their survival and the continuation of their institutions were worth the isolation and the secrecy and the compromises. Over 2 centuries, in total isolation, surrounded by people who shared that belief and had no external reality to check it against, that belief calcified into something unrecognizable as the original mission. The Enclave of Fallout 2 and 3 has not preserved American civilization. It has preserved the organizational structure of American institutional power while abandoning every ideal that American institutional power claimed to exist to protect. They are the form of democracy emptied of democratic content, the language of constitutional rights wielded by people who have decided that those rights do not apply to most of the people alive. Colonel Autumn in Fallout 3 is interesting precisely because he represents an internal dissent within the Enclave that the game handles subtly. He is opposed to President Eden's plan to poison the water supply with a modified FEV strain that would kill everyone with radiation-related mutations. His opposition is not moral. He is not arguing that killing the wasteland's population is wrong in principle. He is arguing that it is strategically counterproductive, that you cannot build a new American civilization if you have killed all the potential citizens. He believes the Enclave needs people to govern, and that people who can be brought under Enclave control are more valuable alive than dead. This is a pragmatic rather than an ethical objection, and the game does not present Autumn as a hero. But it creates a situation where the player can potentially ally with him against Eden in a tactical convergence of interests that does not imply shared values. Players who choose to support Autumn against Eden in Fallout 3's climax are not siding with the good Enclave. They are maneuvering within a conflict between 2 bad options, using one to neutralize the other, and the game knows that is what is happening. The Enclave's presence in Fallout 3 is in some ways a more interesting tragedy than in Fallout 2, because you see them through the eyes of Lone Wanderer, who was born in Vault 101, who grew up believing that the United States was gone, who has been navigating a wasteland that operates on completely different social rules. The Enclave's appearance in the capital wasteland is the reappearance, 200 years late, of exactly the institutional structure that created the world the player has been surviving in. The people who caused the apocalypse, or at least their institutional descendants, have come back to explain that they are here to fix things. The horror of that arrival is not just that they are villainous, it is that they genuinely believe they are the solution to a problem they are responsible for. The Liberty Prime robot, the enormous American flag-carrying battle machine that the Brotherhood of Steel uses in the game's final assault on the Enclave, is one of Fallout 3's most memorable moments. It marches toward the Enclave installation, broadcasting patriotic slogans about the threat of communism while destroying an organization that represents the authoritarian remnants of the American government. The slogans are applied to the wrong enemy. The Enclave is not communist. But the slogan's content about freedom and democracy and the American way of life are, in context, a commentary on what the people operating Liberty Prime claim to be defending and what the people they are attacking claim to be protecting. Both sides have legitimate claims on the symbols and language of American identity. Both sides are, in different ways, using those symbols and that language as cover for goals that would be unrecognizable to the people who wrote the founding documents. The irony is played completely straight. Liberty Prime shouts about democracy while fighting for the Brotherhood, which is not itself a democratic organization. Nobody in the game comments on this. The game trusts you to notice it. Section 22. Fallout's approach to death and what it means to survive. Every Fallout game is, beneath the guns and the exploration and the faction politics, a game about surviving something unsurvivable. The people who emerged from the vaults and the people who endured on the surface in the immediate aftermath of the bombs were not supposed to make it. The scale of the destruction was supposed to be total. The fact that anyone survived, the fact that 200 years later, there are communities and governments and economies and art and music and lovers and grudges and dreams, is a miracle that the games acknowledge without ever quite saying so directly. The character of the Wastelanders, the non-player characters you interact with across every game in the series, is shaped by this. They are people who do not know they are performing a miracle. They are just living in the way people always just live, solving the problems immediately in front of them, maintaining the relationships immediately around them, passing down to their children whatever wisdom they manage to gather about how the world works. The miraculous nature of their existence is invisible to them the way the miraculous nature of any existence is invisible to the person living it. This is why the skeletons matter. The skeletons of the pre-war dead are everywhere in the Fallout universe, in houses and offices and schools and cars, and they are the most honest artifact of the war that the games contain. They are the people who did not make it. They are the people the world was not supposed to survive without. And 200 years later, their descendants are having arguments about water purification and political philosophy and how to treat strangers, which is both an enormous tragedy and an enormous testament to the tenacity of the human instinct toward continuation. The ghoul population of the Fallout universe is a specific meditation on this. Ghouls are humans who absorbed enough radiation to undergo cellular mutation, a process that is lethal in the short term for most people, but that occasionally produces individuals who survive it at the cost of dramatic physical transformation. Ghouls age very slowly or not at all. Some of the ghouls you meet in Fallout games have been alive since before the war. They remember the old world. They were adults when the bombs fell, and they are still alive 2 centuries later, navigating a world that was destroyed around them and rebuilt into something they barely recognize. Harold, who appears in multiple Fallout games, is the most extreme expression of this. He is a ghoul of unusual type, someone who experienced mutation through FEV exposure rather than radiation, and he has been alive and changed again across the entire span of the series' history. By Fallout 3, he has become literally rooted in the ground, a tree growing through his body, immobile in the far north of the capital wasteland, visited by a small community of people who worship him as a deity. He has been alive long enough to watch everything. He has outlived every person he loved and every community he built. His quest line is about whether he wants to continue, and the question is genuine. The game respects his answer, whatever it is. There is a detail about ghouls that the games establish quietly across multiple entries and that most players register as flavor without its full implication. Ghouls can go feral. A ghoul who experiences enough psychological trauma, enough isolation, enough sustained suffering, eventually loses their cognitive function and becomes purely instinct-driven, a creature of appetite rather than a person. The ferals you fight throughout the games were once people. Their condition is not genetic, it is psychological. The mutation that makes ghouls nearly immortal also makes them capable of a specific kind of deterioration that is not physical but mental, a slow erosion of personhood that leaves the body alive and the person gone. This is the most quietly disturbing thing about ghoul lore in the series. The game presents feral ghouls as enemies, which they are because they are dangerous. But embedded in the lore is the knowledge that every feral ghoul was a person who did not have enough reason to stay human. The ferals are not monsters who were never people. They are people who lost the thread. The CAPS economy of the Fallout universe, the use of pre-war bottle caps as currency, is one of the series' most charming pieces of world-building and also a piece of genuine economic logic. After the war, currency inflation and the collapse of institutional backing made printed money worthless. Caps became currency because they were durable, relatively scarce, and could not be manufactured without industrial equipment, giving them a natural scarcity that paper money had lost. The fact that bottle caps were the basis of the economy of the post-war West Coast tells you something about the texture of the immediate post-war period. People traded with whatever was around, and whatever endured long enough to establish a tradition of value became money. By New Vegas, the NCR has moved to paper money backed by gold reserves, which is a step toward more conventional economic organization and also a source of tension with areas of the Mojave that still use caps. The fact that the NCR's paper money is recognizable as money in the old world sense, while caps are the scrappy improvised currency of the wasteland's middle period, maps onto a broader conflict in the game between the NCR's attempt to rebuild pre-war civilization and the prominent wasteland's existing culture of improvised survival. Economic currency is, in this context, a political statement. Which money you accept is a vote on which version of the future you believe in. Mr. House's position on currency is characteristically pragmatic. He accepts both caps and NCR dollars because he intends to dominate the economy regardless of which currency format wins. He is not invested in the cultural meaning of currency. He is invested in controlling the flow of goods and services, which currency denominates but does not determine. This pragmatism is one of the ways House distinguishes himself from both the NCR and the Legion. He is not fighting over symbols. He is fighting over systems. The question New Vegas leaves you with, beneath all its faction politics and its philosophical monologues, is whether the systems Mr. House wants to establish are better or worse than the alternatives. Whether a society run efficiently by a single, very intelligent person is better or worse than a democratic republic that is inefficient and corrupt, but at least theoretically answers to its citizens. Whether an authoritarian military empire that at least produces consistent order is worse than a democracy that cannot project its law beyond its immediate territory. Whether independence, with all its uncertainty and danger, is worth more than the security of choosing the winner in advance. The game does not tell you the answer. It gives you the tools to make an argument for any position and ends with your choice producing consequences that the ending slides describe without evaluating. You can read those slides as an endorsement of your choice or as a record of its costs. The game remains honest about both simultaneously. That ambivalence, that refusal to resolve the questions it raises into simple lessons, is what makes Fallout New Vegas a great work of narrative design. It treats its players as people capable of sitting with difficulty, of holding contradictory information, of making choices that have real costs, and not expecting to be told they were right. The Wasteland does not tell you you were right, it just keeps going. And so do you. Section 23. The moments that define the series' facts, the games never tell you directly. There is a room in the Helios 1 solar plant in New Vegas, a locked room that requires a significant science skill to access, or a key that you have to obtain by completing a specific mission path for the NCR. Inside, you find the controls for the Archimedes weapons system, a pre-war directed energy satellite weapon that still exists in orbit over the Mojave. The facility was supposed to be the most powerful solar power infrastructure in the western United States. Someone decided it should also be capable of killing large numbers of people from orbit. This decision was apparently made routinely, embedded in the facility's design without drama, because in the pre-war United States of the Fallout universe, this kind of military application of civilian infrastructure was a normal institutional choice. You can activate Archimedes at Helios 1 as a one-time weapon. The strike is devastating, and witnessing it for the first time is genuinely impressive. What the game does not emphasize is the implications of its existence. Pre-war America did not just build nuclear bombs. It built persistent orbital weapon systems integrated into power plants. It built FEV research facilities into the vaults meant to shelter civilians. It built subliminal conditioning into its luxury vaults. The war did not happen because of a few bad actors at the top. It happened because the society had normalized the integration of weapons and surveillance and control into the infrastructure of ordinary life, and the people building that infrastructure made those decisions one reasonable-sounding step at a time. The Nirnroot plant that can be found in Fallout 4 near a laboratory in the Commonwealth is a direct reference to the Elder Scrolls, Skyrim, placed there by a Bethesda developer as a small nod between the two most important franchises in the company's history. The Nirnroot is an ingredient in alchemy in the Elder Scrolls games and makes a specific chiming sound when you approach it. In Fallout 4, the plant is labeled as Nirnroot, with a note from a scientist who apparently was also familiar with the Elder Scrolls games, or who is the Fallout universe equivalent of a botanist studying an unusual plant that they named after something in old fiction. The reference is small and entirely self-contained, but it represents something that Bethesda does throughout their games with increasing frequency. Using the texture of the game's world-building to acknowledge the relationship between their worlds, to suggest that the people who built these fictional universes existed in a shared cultural space. The scientist who labeled that plant is, in some way, a Fallout equivalent of the kind of person who plays Bethesda RPGs. The Railroad's faction quest in Fallout 4 contains a detail about Boston's history that most players miss because the quest moves quickly and the environmental storytelling around it is dense. The Railroad uses the Freedom Trail, an actual Boston historical walking route that connects sites of revolutionary history in real-world Boston, as an operative communication method. Coded messages are left at sites along the trail. The choice to use the Freedom Trail is not arbitrary. The trail connects the sites where the American Revolution was organized and carried out, places where people who wanted freedom from an unjust authority worked together in secrecy to change their situation. The Railroad is using it for exactly the same purpose, hiding in the historical landscape of resistance to smuggle people fighting for freedom from an authority that wants to control or destroy them. The specific sites along the Freedom Trail in Fallout 4 are recognizable real locations, and each one has been faithfully recreated in the game's post-war ruins. Players who have walked the real Freedom Trail in Boston will recognize the route. The Old South Meeting House, the Park Street Church, the Granary Burying Ground, all of them are there, transformed by 2 centuries of ruin, but still identifiable in their bones. The game is using real history as a set piece for a conflict about whether synthetic persons have rights. The choice to set that conflict in a landscape dedicated to the memory of a previous freedom struggle is doing thematic work that goes beyond set dressing. The Vault 81 storyline in Fallout 4 is one of the most genuinely surprising pieces of lore in the game because it connects the Vault experimentation framework to something unexpected: actual medical science. Vault 81 was designed to be a research laboratory where experimental drugs and treatments would be tested on an unwitting population, with the research eventually being used to create medical miracles for Vault-Tec's leadership. The overseer who received those instructions, upon entering the vault and realizing what was being asked, chose instead to lock the researchers out of the experimentation chambers and maintain the vault as an actual community. The catch is that the experimental systems are still running, maintained by a robot called Curie, who has been conducting medical research in isolation for 200 years. She has developed cures and treatments for diseases that are devastating the wasteland outside, cures that exist in her databases and are ready to be distributed, that have been ready for decades, locked in a laboratory beneath a vault, because the person who was supposed to authorize their release was afraid of what it would mean to open the door. This is the Fallout series' quietest argument about the relationship between institutions and the people they are supposed to serve. The cures exist. They have existed for a very long time. The reason they have not reached the people who need them is not technological failure. It is fear and bureaucratic inertia and the accumulated weight of a situation no individual felt empowered to resolve. Curie herself, the robot who has spent 2 centuries waiting to be useful, frames this as a practical problem rather than a moral one. She simply wants to help. The obstacle to her helping has always been human. The moment when Curie becomes a companion, when she transitions from a research robot to a person navigating the world, is one of the most emotionally surprising character arcs in Fallout 4. She approaches the Commonwealth with the specific kind of wonder that comes from having known everything about something in theory and nothing about it in practice. She has read every text and document on human experience that was available to her in the vault. She has thought about what it means to be alive, what it means to feel, what it means to choose. And then she is given the chance to actually do it, and the gap between her theoretical knowledge and the actual experience produces something recognizable as genuine discovery. The ghost of the pre-war world is in the music and the advertising, and the Pip-Boy's optimistic little Vault Boy mascot, but it is also in the small domestic objects scattered throughout every Fallout game. The children's toys in the houses, the report cards still in dresser drawers, the photo albums still sitting open on tables, the half-finished letters to family members that were never sent. The pre-war world is documented in its most intimate details in the ruins of its ordinary life, and those ruins are the most effective argument the games make about what was lost. Not civilization. Civilization is an abstraction. What was lost was specific. This family that had a dinner table where they ate together. This child who had a specific report card with a specific grade in a specific subject. This person who was writing a letter to someone they loved and who never finished writing it because the sirens went off and they had to go, and they went, and they did not come back. The Fallout games remember this. Every game in the series at its best is this: a meditation on what ordinary life costs to build, how fragile it is to keep, and how long the ruins of it last after it is gone. War never changes. But the people who fight it, and the people who survive it, and the people who inherit its aftermath and try to build something worth keeping out of the wreckage, those people change constantly. They adapt and fail and try again, and sometimes, quietly and without announcement, they succeed. That is what the wasteland contains. That is what the games have always been about. Find what you missed. Look at the skeletons. Read the terminals. The wasteland has been waiting 200 years for someone to notice what happened here. A note on what the wasteland rewards. Every fact in this video was uncovered by someone who slowed down. Someone who stopped sprinting through a dungeon and read the terminal entries. Someone who talked to an NPC they had no mechanical reason to engage with. Someone who sat in a chair in a ruined house and looked at the objects on the table long enough to ask what the person who set them there must have been thinking. The Fallout series has been rewarding that kind of attention since 1997, and the depth of what it rewards has only grown. Each new game adds more layers, and each older game yields more to returning players who know more about the world than they did the first time. The series is built for multiple playthroughs, not because the combat is different on the second run, but because you are different. You know things. You have connections to establish between pieces of information that were separate on the first visit. You can read the room in ways you could not before. The 1% of players who know the facts in this video are not special by accident. They are the players who looked up from the main quest marker long enough to see what was standing beside the road they were on. The players who treated a fictional world seriously enough to try to understand it, who brought to this invented history the same attention they would bring to a real one. The wasteland will give back everything you put into it. That has always been the promise, and it has never stopped being kept. The Fallout universe contains more deliberate historical and cultural references than almost any other game series, and that density of reference is part of what makes it so rewarding to study seriously. Every time you find a skeleton in a specific pose, every time a terminal entry names a date that connects to another terminal entry in a different location, every time a song on the radio turns out to have lyrics that double as commentary on the situation you are navigating, you are experiencing the product of writers and designers who thought carefully about what they were building and why every detail mattered. There are Fallout fans who have spent more time thinking about the lore of this series than some historians have spent thinking about real historical events. That investment says something about the quality of what Bethesda, Black Isle, and Obsidian have built. These are games that behave like they deserve serious attention, and the people who give them that attention discover that the games were right. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. You can go back to games you have already completed and see them as different things. You can look up what happened in parts of the game you never explored. You can read about the Fallout Bible and the development history and the cut content and the arguments developers had about what the world should be. Or you can simply keep playing, a little more slowly this time, looking left and right when the quest marker is pointing straight ahead. The wasteland is full of things that are waiting to be noticed. They have been waiting for a long time. Most of them will keep waiting, undiscovered by most people who ever walk past them. But the ones who stop and look, who take one extra moment to read the terminal entry or examine the skeleton or trace the reference back to its source, Those players get a different game, a bigger one, a quieter one that keeps giving. That is the game this video was about. I hope you play it.